This story began in the deep forest. A poor girl with ragged clothes and legs all covered in abrasions ran. She was incredibly scared because she had done nothing, but the people around her considered her a real criminal. She just really wanted to see her father and brother and assumed that there must have been some kind of misunderstanding in this whole situation, due to which she was simply misunderstood. She had already made her final decision and was about to avoid it any further when suddenly, without looking at her feet, she accidentally stepped on a trap that was lying in the bushes. The girl screamed loudly in pain. Blood was pouring out of her leg around her. At that very moment, two men in police uniforms ran out and said that Siesta had finally been caught. They grabbed her arms and began to twist them so that the girl would not run away again. Immediately after this, Siesta was returned to the place where she was found. She went into a very dark cave that was in a completely different part of the forest. Of course, her leg was still broken. One of the guards pushed her towards the cold stones and said that she would have to sit in this prison for a long time so she could get used to the conditions around her. Siesta had beautiful purple hair. She sat in a distant corner of the cave and cried, but they at least gave her a bandage to bandage her wound on her leg. In fact, she thought that this time she could live a peaceful and calm life. However, everything turned out to be completely different. Some time passed, and the girl lay there, and with difficulty she still managed to fall asleep on these cold stones. They decided to let visitors in after all. They were two men. As soon as they went down and looked at the girl, they were immediately very upset. One older man asked his friend if she was still alive, but in fact these people turned out to be her brother and father. As soon as Siesta saw them, she was incredibly happy. She carefully approached the exit and asked if it was really her father who had come. However, suddenly she heard her father's voice, which said that Siesta must die, which of course shocked the girl incredibly. She could not believe that they could say something like that to her. She asked in a trembling voice why she had to die. However, father said that this was her destiny. He explained that Hans must be the next to inherit the title, and that not the slightest thing should interfere with this. For this reason, the girl must understand all the consequences. No matter how hard it was for Siesta to live through all this, she still sighed heavily and said that for the sake of her brother, she was ready to bear responsibility for the crime. However, in the end, she said that she had one request. The girl was already crying. She understood that she simply had no way out. And I say each word slowly. She asked them not to leave her. But as soon as the father heard this request, he immediately grimaced. He said that it was all disgusting and that he didn't even want to hear about it. The damned child had no value, and he asked his daughter if she understood it at all. Siesta heard this, was very upset. The man turned around and started to leave. He said that in that case, she just had to fulfill her role. She shouldn't have had any other desires. She didn't deserve it. But in fact, the girl knew perfectly well that this man would do everything to avoid seeing her as his daughter. However, despite all this, she still loved him. Then her brother suddenly tried to calm the girl down and told her not to cry. Siesta was very happy at that moment. She already thought that he would be able to help her and fulfill her request because she definitely did not want to die alone. But the man suddenly smiled maliciously and said that her main desire was to die for her beloved brother. For this reason, he did not understand why she had to worry about all this so much. As soon as the girl heard this, she was even more amazed. At some point, she really hoped that he would support her. However, in the end, she was wrong again. At that moment, she couldn't stand it. The girl raised her voice and asked her brother, why did he say such things? Did he really forget about his promise to save her? The guy explained that she was asking for salvation. Even though she died in her past life, covered in dirt, no matter how he thought about it, he still couldn't do anything. After all, he didn't have memories from her past life. Siesta was then very surprised. She asked if she had really lied to him about something, but the guy explained that her rebellious attitude was very different from Irmel's. If the girl was as sweet as Irmel, then everything would really be different. But as it was, he didn't see the point in even talking about it again. Siesta began to protest. She said that she was also his younger sister and she did not understand why he behaved this way. However, the guy didn't see anything wrong with this. He screamed at her, grabbed her by the hair and said that she was just a damn girl and definitely wouldn't be equal to Irmel. He asked what kind of hair color she had. She had blackened their entire mouth. Siesta tried to take her hair back because it was very painful for her and asked him to let her go. But the guy continued to hold her as if he specifically wanted to hurt her more. But soon, he finally let her go and said with a joyful smile that in fact he was ready to kill her right there. However, no one will be sad. And it was for this reason that he gave her such luxurious shackles. They were all in gold and beautiful precious stones. Siesta immediately looked at them and was very surprised. After this, the girl realized that he had planned all this from the very beginning, and she could not believe that she was such an idiot and simply believed him. Her brother reached for her head again and said that everything was right. It would be bad if she got in his way. For this reason, he simply had to do it. Siesta already thought that he would grab her by the hair again. However, the man simply stroked her head casually and removed his hand. And before he left, he said that he would inherit the title, and she should remember this once and for all. After he left, Siesta could not contain her emotions. She cried bitterly, because now she realized that she was deceived again, and this time she was definitely left completely alone. The girl had been betrayed and killed several times already, and since each time she wanted to trust people again and really thought that this would never happen to her again, she believed in their kindness and innocence. But each time turned out to be not the last, and she had to endure all this humiliation. In the life that Siesta now lived, she had to watch how her brother bought Ermal various precious gifts and gave her a choice. She could really take everything that she liked, even if it was too expensive. Despite the fact that Ermal was an adopted daughter and Siesta was a natural one, the attitude towards the girls was completely different and not what one might think. Because of this, she was, of course, very upset. The Hanten dynasty had bluish-purple hair from generation to generation because only the girl's hair color was different. She began to be called the cursed child. One day, when Siesta was still living in the palace with her brother, sister, and father, her brother decided to give her a gift. It was that very beautiful gold bracelet. He said that he had prepared it especially for her. The girl was incredibly happy then. This was the first gift from him. During all this time, she didn't even believe that she was allowed to touch it and asked if this really happened. The man immediately told her that it was so. Siesta then thanked her brother with all her heart, and after that day, she never took off this bracelet. It was very dear to her. In fact, she was really delighted that the bracelet that her brother bought her, especially thinking about the girl, was also very much so. But in the end, she was naively happy and began to wear it every day. And in the end, she realized that she was simply taken and abandoned. She was betrayed for the 10th time, and the girl realized that she was too naive. The girl began to hit her hand against the wall in order to take off this bracelet and thought that she would never forgive or trust anyone in her life again because everyone lets her down. Siesta thought that she no longer wanted to wear any shackles, and she still managed to destroy this bracelet. These people whom she trusted with all her soul simply took away her freedom. The girl suddenly turned her head to the side and saw small, beautiful butterflies. She immediately rejoiced as soon as she saw them and thought that they had come for her. But at that moment, she felt an incredibly strong weakness in her body. The girl fell to the ground and, leaning her back against the stones, thought that this time she had very little time left. Before Siesta died for those she loved, she wasted her time and was really stupid. At that moment, the girl thought that now she cried for the last time. She would definitely not allow anyone to mock her anymore. Also, from this moment, the girl will certainly defend herself with these thoughts. She lost consciousness and finally died. However, after a short darkness, she suddenly opened her eyes again. She looked around and realized that she was in a very familiar place. Because of this, she was very upset because she again found herself in the same family. Then Siesta dies. The same butterflies always fly to her. And when she opens her eyes, she inevitably finds herself at the age of 16 in her father's estate. On the other hand, several times the revivals were absolutely useless because the girl did not change anything in her life. She did everything possible then and believed that her father and brother would be able to love her if she did as they wanted. But for them, yours, she was nothing more than just a small bug that they used for their own interests and purposes. The girl did not know how much longer she would be constantly despised. She was really tired of it all. So the first thing Siesta did was get up and go to the mirror to look at her appearance again. As soon as she saw her reflection in the mirror, she was very unhappy. After all, in her opinion, she had a terrible face, even though it had only returned to 2 years ago. In addition to all this, she still had her old hair color, which was a real problem for her. Her brother always said that there was something wrong with her hair. As soon as he saw her new hairstyle, he immediately asked if she had cut it herself. Siesta, in a past life. I said in a joyful voice that this was really so. She thought that it would be better to do it herself. The man then smiled and said that it was a good decision and that such a hairstyle really suited her. Of course, his sister. As soon as she heard this, she was incredibly happy. Her brother rarely paid attention to her, and when he noticed such little things, this made her the happiest in the world. Siesta sighed heavily and thought that she was a real idiot who didn't see the sarcasm in his voice. And only now, after another bad ending to her life, she finally understood it. Her mother died because she couldn't look after her. And if Siesta had been strong, she definitely wouldn't have allowed them to kick her. She could have defended not only her rights, but also the rights of her mother. And then everything would have been different. As soon as she thought about all this, she became incredibly angry. Now Siesta knew that she understood everything, and that she was afraid to use force then. However, now everything was different. And those bracelets were also just a trick to hold back the power of Siesta. But in fact, when she ran through the forest in her past life and got caught in a trap, she tried to get out, but she didn't succeed. She couldn't run, but she remembered that she could move to her father with the help of her abilities. The girl immediately thought about it. However, she still couldn't do anything because of this. And then Siesta got caught. She didn't understand why she couldn't return to her father and the others, so she tried again. But the men who stood behind her realized that she was trying to use her strange power. They had absolutely no idea if they could approach her, and one of the partners said that he could be completely calm because Mr. Hans had put shackles on her, so she definitely wouldn't be able to do anything to them. And when Siesta remembered all this, she realized that it was really true. Before he put the bracelet on her, he used his power. Her brother said that he chose it especially for her, and it was really true. He selected it for her powers. The girl thought that he also didn't know anything, and it had to continue like that. She believed that he was really worried about her and didn't understand what was wrong. However, of course, it was all a lie, and he was perfectly aware of everything. Siesta never thought that her father and brother could be a threat to her. She let her guard down and ultimately paid for it with her life again. The girl opened a special hair oil from the lubricants, and in the end she thought that it was time for her to come to her senses. She had to take control of her life and not let everyone else decide for her. Without thinking twice, Siesta changed her clothes and even put on a little makeup. She looked truly amazing, even though she was only 16 at the time. She made a decision that from that moment on, she would no longer cry and show weakness as before. It was time for her to greet her beloved family with a new look and a new mindset. Therefore, her family had already gathered at the dinner table. They were sitting, and her father turned to Ermel, asking how her preparation for the ball that the girl was so eagerly awaiting was going. His adopted daughter replied that everything was fine. Her brother bought her a dress, so she was going to wear it. She thought it would fit the theme perfectly. Then Hans turned to the girl and said that it was very good that she had finally made her choice, because there were a lot of dresses and he understood how difficult it could be to choose one. His beloved little sister laughed happily and told her brother that she was wearing one, but he bought several of them. So of course it became a little more difficult for her to choose, since they were all simply amazing. When the father suddenly thought about it and told the girl that she would need flowers for the ball, the heads of the Elcor and Hakarin families would be coming, so the woman should not disgrace their family under any circumstances. The girl was a little wary because it was really very serious, but she said that she would definitely act like a member of the Hentane family. Therefore, he shouldn't worry. She would never let them down. At that very moment, the door to the dining room opened and Siesta walked in. She was simply shining with her beauty and grace. The girl turned to her father and brother and wished them good morning. As soon as the brother heard her voice, he immediately looked in her direction with irritation. He didn't think that she would suddenly want to join them. But her stepsister looked at the girl and was even more surprised. She asked, "Has something really changed?" And continued to look at the Siesta. She said that there was definitely something different. Siesta giggled and said that she definitely wouldn't be loved more than her. So any changes were completely meaningless and she didn't notice anything like that. Her sister also laughed and said that she was really sorry since she felt that way. However, at that moment, their sweet conversation was interrupted by a knock on the table. This sound was made by the father. He hit the table with his hand and looking at the Siesta with an angry look, he coldly told the girl that he had told her not to appear in front of him. However, for some reason, she plucked up her courage and decided to go down. Hans was also indignant. He stood up from his seat and told his sister that it was definitely pointless for her to preen herself. It couldn't help her in any way, so she had to learn politeness. The man reached out to her with his hand in order to hit her and thereby teach her a lesson. Only Siesta was able to react at that time. She dodged his blow using her magical abilities and thought that nothing new was happening in this life. Everything was going according to the same scenario. The guy almost fell as soon as he saw his sister in front of him. He was very surprised. He did not understand how she could disappear so quickly right from under his nose. But the girl smiled and said that she was right behind him and asked, wasn't he going to teach her so-called good manners? Hans, meanwhile, tried to turn around. However, as soon as he did this, the girl touched him with just one finger, and she had such great strength that he could not stay on his feet and simply fell headfirst into the soup. The father and sister were very surprised. The boy, meanwhile, started coughing because the soup got into his eyes and nose. He tried to remove it, but he was not very successful. Meanwhile, she was incredibly pleased with herself. This was the first time she was able to fight back against her brother, and even take a little revenge on him. Because of this, she felt incredibly good at heart. The father, meanwhile, looked at his daughter and asked with horror how she could do this without even touching him. The girl made an innocent expression on her face and immediately said that this couldn't be happening. After all, she came to have lunch with her family and didn't do anything like that. She also said that she could ask for food to be brought to her like the others, and in the meantime, she looked at the maid, giving her a sign. The maid immediately bowed and said that she would bring everything immediately. After everything around calmed down, Siesta sat down at her place and there was a rather tense atmosphere between them. No one said anything. This awkward silence was too long. In fact, after the girl had rebuffed her brother, her father looked at her silently for the first time and did not make any new comments. And he did not even drive her away. Moreover, even the brother, despite the fact that he clearly had Prince, learned a more difficult lesson and no longer even looked in the direction of the girl. He understood that he could only make things worse for himself in this way and simply accepted the situation as it was. After a short silence, Siesta turned to her entire family and said that all this time, she had been sitting in her room alone and eating only stale bread. For this reason, she was now going to be near her family. She believed that this would be quite enough and that she deserved to dine with them. Only Guns heard this. He was really horrified. He didn't like this idea at all, but he still remained silent and didn't answer her anything about it. Siesta stood up from her seat and apologized for the recent incident, after which she finished her breakfast and left since there was nothing else for her to do there. The girl was very pleased with herself as soon as she stepped out into the corridor. Of course, she was very nervous. However, she thought that she had done her job quite well. Siesta was pleased with herself for the first time. However, this was really only the beginning. Many more different accomplishments and successes awaited her, as well as defending her boundaries. Siesta continued walking towards her room when she suddenly heard the door from the dining room open, and her stepsister ran out. She smiled happily and ran closer to the girl, but Siesta was not so happy to talk to her. She asked what happened and why she decided to stop her. The girl, continuing to smile stupidly, said that Siesta had just been truly incomparable. She hadn't known that a girl could be so delightful and brave. Siesta, hearing these words, was not at all surprised. because before she had always been inconspicuous, so it was quite obvious that the girl did not expect such a display of character. Despite the fact that the girl did not expect to hear such words from Ermel, she did not understand what kind of strange premonition it was inside her, as if her body was trying to warn her about something. Then, Ermel continued to smile and told her sister that in fact she had wanted to improve relations with her for a long time, but was afraid to start. Siesta, hearing about this, was very surprised and asked if this was really true. Her little sister, smiling happily, said that everything was exactly like that, and so that they could get closer. She decided to prepare a gift for her. It was a beautiful silver decoration with delightful blue stones. The girl explained that it was her decoration. However, she thought that it would suit her better and decided to give it to her. The girl was a little surprised at the time and asked if this was really the one that her brother had given her, and she also asked why in that case Ermel was giving it to her. My sister smiled happily and said that this is quite rare and an expensive thing. She thought that this decoration could be just perfect for her little sister, and for this reason she made such a gift. Of course, Siesta understood that she had something in mind, because she definitely wouldn't do something like that just like that. But the girl had her own plan for this, so she thanked her sister for this gift and said that she had also been thinking about how the two of them could improve their relationship. Her sister smiled happily and said that she was very glad that everything had worked out this way. Of course, Siesta didn't know for sure whether the girl really thought that or was just lying to her in order to get something for herself. But either way, she was no longer going to let them all use her for their own selfish purposes. In fact, in the kingdom of Nibelui, there lived clans that had a rare and special power, and it was precisely the clan of Henton that possessed the power of light. The Elcor's mouth possessed the powers of darkness, and the Hakarainen had the power of air. These natures had the highest count titles and enjoyed great trust from the state and the aristocracy. Meanwhile, Siesta returned to her room. She decided to go out onto the veranda to clear her head a little and thought about the gift her sister had given her. Siesta also thought that he would want her to wear this decoration to the upcoming ball. She thought about the Elcor's aide, who was the head of the family that possessed the power of darkness. He was called the White Swan for his beautiful elegance and grace. However, Siesta was on very bad terms with him. As for Len Arkanen, they never had any contact, so the girl practically didn't even know anything about him, so she didn't consider him a strong threat to herself. One day, Siesta was going to find out what kind of person he was. However, at that moment, she had to start preparing for the ball because it was an incredibly important event. For this reason, she returned to the room and found a purple cape in her closet. She put it on herself and thought that nothing had really changed in her. This, of course, did not suit her. For this reason, she plucked up her courage and took off this cape to eat and no longer wanted to hide from everyone. She was going to declare herself to the world. And for this, she had to start at least with her town. As soon as she went out into the city, she was truly pleased. In fact, she didn't even think about how she used to go out into the street out of fear of being wounded. She always ran in a hurry through the alleys and hid behind the hood. Because of this, Siesta couldn't even properly look at the city. As the eldest daughter, she had the right to be treated fairly. For this reason, to begin with, she was going to change her style of clothing a little. As soon as Siesta entered the shop where they sew clothes, the saleswoman immediately ran up to her and said hello. However, as soon as she saw this girl, she immediately became very scared. The owner immediately recognized her amazing hair color and realized that this was the very same cursed child of Henton. Siesta, as soon as she saw her suspicious look at herself, asked if something had happened. The woman, meanwhile, was a little scared. She turned to her and said that nothing like that had happened. But of course, the girl saw how she reacted to all this. For this reason, the girl said in a very serious voice that she personally came to this place and it was not an earthquake at all. She just wanted to look for a new dress for herself. Therefore, she did not need to react so sharply to this. The saleswoman immediately ran off in the other direction. She asked her for forgiveness and said that she would immediately prepare everything. And after some time, she came with a large selection of dresses. She explained that these were the most popular specimens that might interest Siesta, while she stood to the side, shaking with fear. The girl herself, meanwhile, thought that she was obliged to make an unforgettable impression. For this reason, she was not ready to make concessions for this reason. She needed good options. They are the ones that the woman provided her. The hostess, meanwhile, pointed somewhere to the side and said that if Siesta wanted, she could try it on in a special place for this and think about her choice. The girl thoughtfully said that she actually wasn't against it. Siesta thought that maybe there were a few items that might look good on her and headed towards the fitting rooms. But turning her head to the side, she suddenly noticed a beautiful brooch in the form of a purple butterfly that was lying on the display case. She asked if she could look at this pin. The saleswoman suddenly smiled awkwardly and told the lady that it was too expensive. It was one of a kind, so its price was truly astronomical. So she did not advise the girl to focus her attention on this thing. Siesta, hearing that this decoration was the only one in the world, immediately thought that it was very good. That way she could definitely stand out from everyone else. Therefore, the girl also pointed out small earrings and shoes that could suit her with this brooch, and the outfit that she was going to try on. The saleswoman had no choice but to agree to this. After some time, Siesta tried on all several outfits, and despite the fact that from the outside they didn't look very good, on her they played in a completely new way. The girl thought that in this form she could certainly get rid of the negative image of a cursed child. She really was delightful, so she took the outfit for herself anyway. Siesta thought that she would be truly magnificent. At a beautiful ball, however, for her, it would also not just be a place of entertainment, but a real battlefield. In other words, Siesta would be there as a soldier in armor, and she definitely wasn't going to let anyone break her. This time, the girl was absolutely serious, and for this reason she didn't even think about giving up. After some time, she bought the outfit and even changed into it. The saleswoman even came out to accompany the girl and bowed, thanked her for the purchase, and told her to come to her again. As soon as the girl went outside, she immediately saw a noble lady accompanied by a maid. And because of this, she felt a little sad. Siesta knew that she also needed a personal maid. But now, not one of the maids, even looking at the hair color of her brother or father, would even think of agreeing to take on this role, so the girl was completely alone. She went further and sighed heavily, thinking about where she could find a good and, most importantly, faithful person. At that moment, Siesta suddenly went out into the square and heard loud screams of some man. He was shouting at the poor little girl and saying that she was useless, and he even beat her. The man stepped on the poor girl's head and said that she was too fearless since she had decided to go back and asked to come back again. The girl, who had bright green hair, covered her ears with her hands. She screamed loudly and asked him for forgiveness. She said that this time she had done everything, so she really wanted him not to be angry with her and to finally listen. Siesta was shocked as soon as she saw all this. The girl just stood aside for a while and watched what was happening. She did not know whether she should interfere in this situation or not. The man, meanwhile, shouted at her again. He asked how he could not be angry with her and how she dared to answer him anything at all. Why she thought she had the right to be more polite than everyone else. She was nobody, and for this reason she should not even open her mouth. The girl continued to lie with her head down. She called him father, and after that she did not answer anything. The man, meanwhile, turned around and began to leave. He looked at her for the last time with a casual glance and said that everything was right. Idiots like her should still beg his generosity and not find it stupid to come to him. The girl then began to cry even more. She asked the man not to leave her. She continued to call him father and said that without him she definitely wouldn't be able to do anything. She didn't even know where to go. Siesta, who had been watching what was happening all this time, was simply horrified. She did not understand what had just happened and what she should do next. However, at that moment the girl realized one fact for herself, that wherever she was, there were always strong or weak, and always the strong were unreasonably cruel to everyone. Siesta had no choice but to simply endure the bloody vomiting after another volley of blows because she saw no new way out for herself. And when the storm passed, her only wish was that all this would turn out to be just a dream, or her imagination. She did not want to accept that all this was in reality. Meanwhile, when the little girl ran after her father so that he would forgive her, the man became very angry. He swung at her again and, calling her a little creature, told her to stop clinging to him. But Siesta was at his mercy at that moment and blocked the man's blow. She even used her abilities to prevent him from harming her too. At some point, the girl looked up and saw in front of her the girl who had saved her. She was very surprised, but did not say a single word. The man was very indignant. He looked at Siesta and asked who she was anyway, because he had never seen her before and did not understand why she decided to interfere. Siesta then looked at the young girl, who was completely exhausted, and she thought that she looked exactly the same before. She only faintly hoped that at least someone would be able to save her someday. However, in the end, no one helped her. But Siesta decided that she could help this poor girl. She turned to her and said that now she was not the same as before, so she asked that she also find the strength in herself to get up. The girl was very shocked. She continued to lie on the ground for some time, not understanding what this mysterious lady wanted. But the man laughed and asked who allowed her to command in this place. He also called her an idiot and told her to leave immediately and never again dare to interfere in matters that were not asked. But Siesta, of course, was not going to give in to his provocations. She just looked at him with a disrespectful look and told him to shut up completely, because no one asked his opinion. The guy was very surprised when he heard this. He was not used to someone addressing him in this way, and especially not a girl. But Siesta smiled happily and asked if he really didn't understand what the cursed child of the Hanton family had told him, or if she needed to repeat it. And as soon as the man heard this, he was immediately overcome with fear. He understood who she was, and for this reason he didn't even say anything else. Siesta, meanwhile, turned to him again and asked where his former courage had gone, since he had been so brave to insult and attack them. The man, meanwhile, turned around and started to run away in horror. He said that this girl should never approach him because he didn't want to die. Siesta, meanwhile, was shocked. She could not believe that he, like the last coward, abandoned his daughter and ran away with his heels flashing. She was even disgusted to look at all this. Then, the girl turned to the poor thing, who was still lying on the ground, and asked if she had always behaved the same way as she did now. The girl looked at the unfamiliar woman in surprise. She didn't understand what she needed at all and how she should react in such a situation. Well, Siesta said that if she wanted to grovel all her life in search of love, then of course she could remain in that position or go back for her father. But the girl also looked at her and said that if she wanted to radically change her life, then, in that case, it would be better for her to get on her feet and go with her. Of course, the girl didn't want such a life. Even though she didn't know Siesta, for some reason she believed her, and for this reason she put her hand in hers so that she could help her get up. When Siesta turned around, she saw that many people were standing around them and whispering about something. The girl got very angry because of this and immediately yelled at them and said that there was nothing to see there. But they did not stop talking to each other about this situation, and Siesta asked if they really wanted her to curse them too. If not, then in that case, they would have been better off listening to her. The people who were standing around and watching what was happening immediately became scared upon hearing this and started running away so that nothing bad would really happen to them. After all, they all believed in these stories about the evil cursed child. Siesta, as soon as she saw this, immediately laughed. She thought that saying that she was a cursed child, as it turned out, was quite useful, so she decided not to completely give up this title. After that, she finally took the girl by the hand and began to direct her in the other direction. The girl was very happy. She really expected that a new life was now waiting for her. As soon as the ladies came out of the dark alley, Siesta let her go and said that now she could live freely. No one would dare to offend her anymore, and the girl now had her own right to choose. However, the girl hearing this was shocked. She did not know what to do, so she did not stay in place but followed her savior. Siesta didn't pay attention to her for a while. She thought that the girls just needed to go that way as well. However, she soon realized that Da was just following her, so the girl stopped and asked why she was following her. She explained to the girl that now she was free and could go wherever she wanted. She had many choices now in life, so she did not understand why she found Siesta specifically for her. But the girl didn't answer. She just stood there and even started wringing her hands as if she was very anxious. Then the girl looked more closely and saw that she also had many scratches. She realized that this lady was injured and therefore accustomed to rough treatment, pointing out that living a siesta would not be able to give her the independence that the girl needed, therefore she was in a difficult situation. However, at that moment, she put her hand on the girl's shoulder and said that she believed in her with all her heart. If she suddenly had no reason to live because she did not know any other life, then she had a way out. Siesta said with a smile on her face that, in that case, she could live for her sake. The girl immediately became happy when she heard this. It was truly a great relief. Therefore, with tears in her eyes, she thanked her and said that this is exactly what she wanted to do. The girl was actually not against it. Then she said that everything was decided. And after that, she asked what her name was because she still hadn't found out her name. Jessica said her name. Then Siesta extended her hand forward and introduced herself, and she also said that she was incredibly glad to meet them. Jessica also smiled and said that she was also glad to meet them. Then we shook hands, and this became the beginning of their strong communication. At the same time, a tall, fair-haired man stood behind the alley. He watched the siesta and how she helped this unfortunate girl who was being abused by her own father. And in fact, as soon as he saw his friend, he was very surprised because she had changed quite a lot. And this, of course, interested the man. Some time passed since then, and finally the very day of the ball arrived. Siesta put on the dress that she had bought a little earlier and also did a beautiful hairstyle by inserting into her hair that expensive decoration that she had also bought. In fact, Jessica helped her dress and braid her hair. Now, she was her personal maid, and Siesta was very happy about it because she knew that she could trust this girl. She also noticed that the maid was quite skilled and assumed that all this was because her father forced her to do many different things. Jessica was indeed a good candidate for the job of a personal maid. She carried out any task, and now, after some time of living in the palace, she even looked different from their first meeting. Siesta suddenly turned to her maid who was tidying up her hair and said that absolutely no one in the world liked her hair color. However, for some reason the girl was not afraid of this. She asked why it was like that. Jessica, a little embarrassed, said that of course she wasn't afraid. She had thought from the first day that her hair was incredibly beautiful. To some extent, she even envied her. As soon as Siesta heard this, she was very surprised. She explained that it was the first time someone had told her such a thing. And in fact, she was pleased to hear it. Of course, her hair never pleased the girl. However, now that she decided to change her thinking completely, she even began to like this color, smiling. She told Jessica that she was incredibly glad that the girl now worked for her as a maid. Hearing this, she also became embarrassed. It was important for her to hear these words. However, Siesta looked at the maid and said that she really hoped that in the future, everything would continue smoothly and that they would not have any conflicts. The maid smiled and also said that she hoped so. Some time passed since then, and Jessica, helping the girl to get up, said that apparently the rest of the lords had already left a long time ago and asked if this meant that she was late. But Siesta replied that she still had enough time, and she was already used to them always leaving her alone. So it was nothing new to her that the same thing happened this time. In fact, they never took the girl with them when they went out. And this time, of course, they also left her at home and didn't even warn her that they were going anywhere. Siesta thought that they would simply be stunned because a demon would appear at the ball. She was going to come there supposedly to save her father and the others with the help of her abilities. And in the end, everything will not go according to plan with her abilities. Trouble will happen, and the girl will receive a serious injury, because of which she will then have to undergo treatment for a long time. She still remembered that feeling when fangs dug into her skin. Her brother used her as bait to save himself, and because of this, the demon simply attacked her. Then suddenly, Jessica turned her attention to the lady and noticed that she was very worried. She immediately told the girl that she had an unhealthy complexion and asked if everything was okay. Siesta, who clutched her throat for some time, tried to calm down. Soon she succeeded, and smiling she said that everything was fine. The girl immediately made an innocent expression on her face and said that she was fine. But she thought that her father was going to make her brother the next head of the family. He saw that Siesta could become an obstacle for him. The girl never received approval not only from her father, but also from the heads of the Elcor and Hakurane families. For this reason, she thought that she should first find out about the two of them, and only after that, perhaps, she could persuade them to her side. Therefore, soon Siesta went straight to the ball, where quite a lot of different guests had already gathered. They were chatting and discussing situations among themselves. Her brother was talking with his friends, his father was standing next to him, and the man he was talking to smiled and said that to his surprise the lady was not seeing her Siesta either. And at this ball he also asked if something serious had happened to her because she was really gone quite often. But the father spoke up and said that she was not at all suitable for such magnificent places. And the brother, smiling, said that whether she came or not no one would notice anyway, so they saw no point in even trying. Sesta, who was standing near the entrance at the time, thought that she was being put in a bad light again. She often did something without knowing that it was all in vain. After all her efforts were outweighed by bad words from her father and Hans. In fact, the fair-haired guy also heard these words, sighing heavily. He said that it was a pity that Lady Siesta did not come, because he came to this event precisely to see her. The other people who stood near Ido couldn't take their eyes off him. He was as gorgeous as always in his expensive suits and perfectly styled hair. As soon as Ida looked at them, they almost fainted. The man knew that they would have such a reaction, but he still liked doing such things. As soon as Hans saw this, he immediately sighed heavily and turned to his friend, asking if he was seriously continuing to do this, and also asked if he really wanted to meet his sister. The guy replied that he hadn't seen her since their mother passed away. She was already innocent then, like a flower bud. And he would be interested to know what kind of flower she had ended up becoming after so much time. As soon as the brother heard this, he even felt a little disgusted by this fetish. Of course, he considered his sister a completely different person and certainly could not compare her to a beautiful flower. At the same time, one beautiful lady in a bright red dress approached Ido and said that he was saying such wonderful words even about the cursed children. Therefore, she believed that he was a very noble gentleman, and this attracted her to him even more. Another lady agreed with her and said that it would be better if instead of the damn child he said something similar about her. However, the girl in the red dress got a little angry that she decided to interfere in their conversation, and because of this she rudely asked if she could shut up. She immediately declared that only she was worthy of Mr. Ido, so there was no point in anyone else even laying claim to him. The girls began to argue among themselves. However, at that moment Hans' father came up and said that he thought that he was most worthy of being an Ermel, a member of the same family of the great count, and asked if they thought so. As soon as the tall girl heard about this, she immediately became angry. It was Mrs. Alias, and she already wanted to answer something. However, the object of her adoration spoke directly. He sighed heavily and turned to her and said that he could not accept the attribution of superiority and humiliation to women in such a place for this reason. He would like her to stop such conversations because even he himself felt very uncomfortable about it. He turned to Lady Veronica and asked if she would relieve him of this place. The girl immediately beamed with joy. After all, it was she who believed that Ido was more worthy than all the others. For this reason, smiling happily, she immediately agreed. The man replied that in that case he was glad. He liked it when such beauties as her smile and do not argue with other girls. The man himself thought about the fact that he simply had to stand up for her even though he did not agree with her. He was happy with such a lot of attention from the girls, and for this reason he did not see any problems in this. Hans, who was standing and watching everything that was happening, smiled and praised his friend, saying that it was an excellent job. They decided to continue the dialogue. However, suddenly the butler announced that Mrs. Vivian had entered the hall. Everyone immediately looked at the balcony where the girl had appeared. It was a beautiful young blonde lady. She had gray eyes, and she was wearing a very beautiful burgundy and white dress. Next to her, there was also a young guy with a short blonde haircut. The girl was very friendly. She was the empress of the state, and all the guests, as soon as they saw Vivian, immediately began to bow before her. They greeted the girl and wished her all the best. People started whispering among themselves. Someone said that whenever he saw Mrs. Vivian, she always smiled. She treated everyone equally, regardless of their status and position in society. It was worthy of respect. People believed that despite the fact that the princess was also a holy virgin, she was truly a real treasure of their country. Not only because of her titles, she was simply a kind person and thus attracted many. The fair-haired man who was accompanying Vivian looked around in the meantime and suddenly noticed that the lady he had been watching on the street for some reason was not at the ball. This surprised him very much. However, the girl suddenly started talking to the people and said that she was sincerely glad that they had all gathered on this wonderful day. She also said with a smile on her face that today they were all gathered for a ball organized by the royal family and asked if anyone would like to take the opportunity to make an announcement. She looked at Alias, who was Hans's father. And the man, of course, did not object and thanked the princess for such a wonderful opportunity. After this, he addressed everyone present and said that for a long time he had been the head of the family and served the empire, but the time had come for him to hand over his place to his eldest son, Hans. Only at that moment his speech suddenly stopped, as a huge whisper went through the hall because people looked up and saw large glowing butterflies that were incredibly beautiful. They did not understand what these shining butterflies were, and at that moment they immediately thought that the same cursed girl from the Hanton family had arrived. Alias, hearing and seeing all this, immediately panicked. He did not understand what kind of gaze he heard because he knew that he had left his daughter at home, so she definitely could not have appeared in this place. Hey. In the meantime, also began to look around and thought about the fact that the source of that enormous power was a girl who was very close to him, and this surprised him incredibly. And all because this girl Taki was really Siesta, she used her magical abilities and conjured more and more butterflies. Vivian also paid attention to her and recognized her. After the performance was over, the girl addressed everyone and said that she had come to meet the Empress and was glad to welcome everyone present. Siesta curtsied in greeting and said that she was the heir to the title of head of the Huntaton family, and also gave her name for those who suddenly did not know it. The fair-haired guy who was standing next to Vivian was very happy when he saw her. After all, it was this girl he was looking for in the crowd. However, other men did not understand what kind of idea it was about the most important thing why she did it. They thought that she was craving attention like a deprived child. Meanwhile, Ermelka just saw her sister and heard that she called herself the heir, and was very surprised. Veronica, who was nearby at the time, was also very surprised. She could not believe that this was the same cursed child about whom there were so many different rumors. Meanwhile, the father of the Siesta began to push people aside and approached her. He called her an idiot and asked what she was doing. But he did not have time to get to her because all the spectators heard some strange sounds of broken glass, and as soon as they turned their heads to the side, they saw that the window was broken, and through it flew a lot of terrible bloodthirsty monsters who wanted to kill them. Of course, the aristocrats were very scared and started running away in different directions. There was real chaos. People understood that these were demons, and that now it would be the end for them since they could not defend themselves from them. When one of the demons ran at Veronica, Ido decided to also use his magical abilities. He directed them straight towards the demon and thereby prevented his attack. Soon, a terrible, huge creature just fell to the ground right next to the girl. She screamed loudly. Everything she did was shaking with fear. She was incredibly scared by what she saw. But the man came closer to her and said that she needed to run, and also asked if everything was okay with her and if this monster had hurt her anywhere. Veronica immediately thanked him and said that she was fine. After that, she started to run away, and Ido looked to the side and saw Link next to him, who was the head of the Hakurane family and possessed the power of air. Smiling happily, he turned to the guy and said that they worked well together, and he also added that he was not going to lose to this terrible monster, so he would also like to fight. In fact, in the 8th reincarnation, Siesta Monster ate her before she even saw the two using their powers. So the girl thought that she should first determine the level of power that she could use against these demons. Chaos continued to rage around Veronica ran towards the exit. However, there was too big a crowd there. She saw that a monster was also starting to approach the people. Everyone around was shouting and pushing Vivian, who was also standing on the balcony and watching this. Her Sokka was very scared. She ran down and said that they should help these poor people. However, the guy who was accompanying her suddenly grabbed Vivian by the hand and said that it was too dangerous there, so it had to stop immediately. With difficulty, he still managed to take her away, and before he left, he saw that there was also a ramp below. No matter how much he wanted to save her, he could not do it. Ado, meanwhile, stood to the side and watched everything that was happening. He didn't even pay attention to the fact that a monster was approaching him from behind. Link saw him first. He ran to the guy and told him not to let his guard down under any circumstances. He managed to react in time and use his wind abilities to neutralize this monster. As soon as people saw how he did it, they were delighted and thought that it was not at all surprising why he became the head of the family at 14 years old. Ado, meanwhile, was completely calm. He was glad that he was saved. However, in fact, he was not very worried about it. Link was running past the window that had broken and suddenly noticed some sparkling thing on the ground. The guy immediately stopped and picked it up, looking at it more closely. He noticed that it was a magic crystal. He was very surprised by this. Meanwhile, a fair-haired guy approached him. He saw his partner's anxiety and immediately asked what happened. Link didn't show him the stone. He hid it in his pocket and said that everything was fine, and also suddenly began to cover his face with his hand. Siesta, who was also standing nearby and watching all this, understood what power and what level of abilities they used. Therefore, very soon she was also ready to join this confrontation and show everyone around what a capable girl she was. Meanwhile, she looked around the crowd and didn't see her brother there. She realized that he had somehow already managed to escape, and this surprised her a little. This was indeed the case, as the father took Ermel and his son by the hand and began to lead them to the exit. He said that they should not be there but should go to a safe place so as not to get hurt. Ermel was very happy about this. She was grateful to this man for taking care of her, even though she was not related to him by blood. However, the man suddenly looked at the girl very sternly, grimacing. He said that it would be bad if she got hurt. However, it did not look friendly at all. Armel, hearing this, became very worried. However, she did not show it and smiling said that she would be very careful. Then Hans came up to her, stroked her head and said that she didn't have to worry because he would be there and would definitely protect her if anything happened. But the father turned to his son and told him to go and do something about these monsters already, because this should have already ended. The guy hearing this immediately became worried, but his dad said that he was the heir to the title of head of the family, and if he missed the opportunity now, then that terrible nonsense that he said, if all this comes true, and they definitely didn't need it. Guns began to resist. He said that the two who were fighting the monsters had power, so he did not understand how he could help in this situation. His father, Surovi, looked at the boy and asked him to answer him. Didn't he really want to be the head of the family? There was despair in his voice. Of course, Hans didn't want to let his father down, so he just nodded his head, trying to tell him that the man would do everything. Then he took his daughter and started walking towards the exit. The guy, meanwhile, thought that only he could prove that he would be the heir. So he turned around and returned to the hall. And at that very moment, he saw how a huge monster began to rush towards him. The man did not expect this at all, and from the gust of wind that came from this monster, he fell to the ground. Hans was very worried. He did not know what to do. The monster, meanwhile, began to approach him very quickly. The guy could not do anything against it. So he simply shouted and told him to stop. But of course, this did not happen. So he sat on the ground and covered his face with his hands so as not to see his death. However, in the meantime, Siesta ran up to them. She covered him with her body, and the guy, seeing this, thought that this was a very bad idea. Since the man was going to set her up, he hit his sister straight in the back and made sure that she was even closer to this monster. The other two family members who had abilities immediately panicked upon seeing this and tried to run to the girl in order to save her. However, they were too far away. The monster had already opened his mouth to eat the Siesta. However, the girl was not worried. On the contrary, she even smiled. He immediately ran and began to address the girl and told her to be careful. Then suddenly he saw that the other monsters had turned around and were already beginning to approach them as well. They blocked his path so he couldn't run to the girl. The guy tried to resist these demons. However, it took some time. As soon as he dealt with the two monsters, he looked towards the Siesta and realized that he wouldn't have time to reach it anyway. But when he saw the girl's face, he was surprised. He didn't understand why she was smiling. At that moment, Siesta raised her hand up and used her magical abilities. She just touched that monster and it immediately fell dead to the ground. As soon as Linku saw this, he was very amazed. He did not understand how she was able to defeat him with just one touch. He had never seen such power before. Immediately after this, many white butterflies began to appear around the girl. The man, watching what was happening, was delighted. He considered this sight beautiful. Ado, who was standing nearby and also watching everything that was happening, was amazed because not even a second had passed and she had risen in strength to such a level that he had never seen anything like it in his life. When everything finally calmed down a little, Hans turned to his sister and said that it was not customary to show strength in public. However, they used it one after another. Because of this, he became very worried. Meanwhile, people began to whisper among themselves. One of the aristocrats said that it was undoubtedly the power of light and that they were seeing it in person for the first time. The lady who accompanied him said that those fierce monsters turned into fluttering butterflies, and she could not believe that such a thing was even possible. People around began to applaud with admiration. They approached the Siesta and wanted to talk to her, but the girl addressed them first. She told everyone present that as they could now see for themselves, she used the same power as the Elcor and Huracan families, so she declared herself the heir to the title of head of her family. The people around heard this and were scared. They thought that this could not happen. One of the girls even turned to Ido and asked if he knew about this. The man himself was sincerely amazed. He said that he actually thought that Hans would become the head of the family and certainly did not expect that the girl would declare herself as such. Hans, who heard all this, became very angry. He got up from his seat and began to leave as quickly as possible before he attracted unnecessary attention. His friends smiled happily and said that they could talk about it after all. They weren't strangers. And if he needed a helping hand, he was ready to listen to the guy. Ado also said that he believed that the Hentai family's strength was the weakest of all three families. However, as it seemed to Siesta, he was very wrong. Guns began to be indignant. He said that it was all fake. This girl was a cursed child, and she could not use the power of the Henta family. At some point, her father began to return to the hall. He said that she was simply deceiving people in order to attract attention to herself. And therefore, he said that they should under no circumstances listen to her. Hans was very scared because of his father's approach. He knew that he would be scolded severely, so he put his hand on Siesta's shoulder and called her a pathetic girl. However, he said that this time it was too much. She shouldn't have done that. He also smiled and told her to correct her mistake. But in fact, Siesta understood that her brother did not have the influence of the head of the family. He looked down on everyone, but he himself had always been a real loser. The girl often faced injustice on his part. That's why she understood who was really pathetic and could only cry like a child and never had the courage to stand up for himself. After a short silence, Hans told his sister that he also had something to apologize for, so he was about to say something, but they were interrupted. It was Ado. He approached the couple and, turning to his friend, said that if he continued in the same spirit, then she would also be able to retreat. After that, he looked at the girl and, smiling peacefully, asked if everything was okay with her, because she had used quite a lot of strength. She simply smiled back at him and thanked him for his concern. She said that she was fine. Over time, people began to talk among themselves. They said that they thought that Mr. Hans was more intelligent. However, in the end, he appeared to be a completely different person now. Someone else agreed with her and said that he didn't understand which of these things was true. However, at the very least, he was lowered in the eyes of others because he had acted really strangely. Over time, the father came up to them and said that this was really too much. Ermel stood nearby and watched everything that was happening. She noticed that the father was very angry, and because of this, she became wary. However, at that moment, Link turned to them all and asked them to stop. He looked at the siesta and with a smile on his face said that it was really amazing. The girl was a little surprised when she heard this. She didn't expect to hear compliments in her direction. However, she was really pleased about it. Link began to speak admiringly about how the way she turned monsters into butterflies could never be repeated by anyone else. And for this reason, he was very grateful to her for such an impressive show. Smiling happily, he also turned to the guests and asked if everyone saw how it happened. He also asked if they thought it was cool, because it really was cool. One of the noble ladies thoughtfully said that of course it was interesting because the monsters evaporated without leaving even a small trace behind them. And the man who accompanied this lady also said that fortunately there were no casualties either, all thanks to the 3 great grab families, and he was incredibly grateful to them for this, because it is really important. Link smiled and said that of course they had to do it. Their power is needed to protect people. For this reason, he is very glad that this time it also went without. But with me maybe dressed, Ayesta was very glad that this boy instantly changed the tense atmosphere. She was also happy that he started talking a little, because in this way she was able to start to get to know him a little better, and soon perhaps she could establish contact. Linka smiled and said that, in fact, he also doesn't like such formal events. So at least he was able to relax with the help of these monsters. After that, he came up to her from the other side and said that it was very good that she came on this day, and also suggested that they talk a little more because he would definitely like to get to know her a little better. The girl, meanwhile, looked at the upper balcony and noticed that Mrs. Vivian was not there. So she assumed that she had also been evacuated, which was quite obvious. She was able to make an impression as the heir to the title of head of the family, so there was no longer any need for her to stay in this hall and simply waste her time. For this reason, the girl told Link that she was grateful to him for this invitation. However, she would like to take advantage of the opportunity to talk another time, because now she had to leave. She also addressed all the people present who were looking at her without stopping and asked for forgiveness for leaving them so early on that day. Siesta explained that the next time they would definitely see each other was at the inheritance ceremony, after which she activated her magical abilities and disappeared in the same place where she appeared. Ado, meanwhile, smiled happily and said that her figure dissolved into the crowd of people. It was time to end the adventures for the day, so he said that it was time for him to leave too. And heading towards the exit, he turned to Hans, who was still standing incredibly shocked by everything that had happened. He told the guy that his complexion was unhealthy, so he advised him to also go and rest. The friend did not refuse this. Therefore, they left the hall together, where the lively conversation continued. All the people discussed everything that had happened. After all, they were really surprised by what had happened. Meanwhile, Link stood in place. He looked at the departing couple and thought that he had definitely planned something and it wasn't so good. Meanwhile, Siesta teleported with the help of her abilities straight to her bedroom, where Jessica was already waiting for her. The maid, seeing her mistress, smiled happily and greeted her, saying that she was very glad that she had already returned. Siesta meanwhile smiled happily and said that her appearance went through the van. Her brother and the others really made fun of her all these years because she really was good. Jessica came closer to her and asked if she was always under so much pressure from that Hans, because now she seemed so free and happy when she no longer followed her brother's orders. She said that she understood everything correctly, but the most important thing was that now everything was different, so she suggested not to focus on this not very pleasant topic. Jessica agreed and changed the subject. She asked if the lady was tired and also added that she had taken care of everything in advance and prepared a bath for her so that the woman could wash herself thoroughly and relax. I immediately thanked her and said that she was just thinking about freshening up before going to bed, and for this reason added that I would go straight there immediately. But before leaving, she also said that she would call Jessica again, because she would probably have some difficulties after that. She went to the bathroom. Several hours had passed since then, and the girl had already managed to take a bath and was sitting in the living room completely relaxed with a cup of hot tea. As soon as she heard loud steps behind the closed door, she immediately realized that it was her brother and father who had returned. For this reason, she was already prepared for this unpleasant conversation. And the girl was indeed right, because after some time the door to her room opened and they both started yelling at her, asking if she even understood what she was doing. Siesta was completely calm. She smiled and told her brother to also calm down. After all, if he was so excited, his blood pressure would rise, and he might feel ill. How could she say that she had just drunk some chamomile tea and asked if her brother would also like to drink a cup to calm his nerves, which were clearly on edge? The man only got even more angry from this. Hans came closer to her and asked what she had done. Did she really consider people to be idiots? At the same time, Irma approached the door. She looked inside and thought that her brother was very nervous in the carriage, so she decided to check how things were going there. As soon as she did this, you also heard your father's voice, who asked Siesta if she had completely forgotten what he had told her for many years. He came closer to her and said that she was forbidden to show herself in public because she was already aware that she was a disgrace to their entire family. And now she just took it and unceremoniously broke this rule. He also said that he was very disappointed in her. After all, she also dared to use her power, which was also seen by strangers, so he did not understand how Siesta could do this to him. But the girl at that moment calmly stood up from her seat and said that she knew all this perfectly well and absolutely understood the consequences of her actions. She also, for a while, silently thought about the fact that she had heard these words for a dozen reincarnations already, and all her life she considered herself incredibly stupid and therefore followed orders. But she did not answer anything to her father. The girl only noticed that his tie was a little untidy. She came closer to him and said that it was surprising because before he had never forgotten about his appearance and always kept it in perfect condition. She began to straighten his tie and said that she never even thought of violating his instructions. She quickly tightened his tie to his throat and said that very soon his father would have to accept reality because the strength of their family was not manifested in him or his brother. Their strength appeared precisely during the siesta. For this reason, he simply needs to accept the situation as it was and not resist, because it will be useless anyway. She explained that even if he hid it, the truth would not magically disappear. Therefore, very soon she was sure that he would acknowledge it and come to terms with the whole situation. Otherwise, she could make the two of them disappear at any moment. At that moment, Siesta waved her hand and many white butterflies appeared around her, which appeared after she defeated the monsters. Father and brother immediately began to wave away these butterflies because they were afraid that they could do something bad. But the girl then waved her hand again and they all disappeared. Then Siesta turned around and said that this room was not suitable for the heir to the title of head of the family, so she wanted to move to the top floor. At that moment, the color of her eyes changed and one of them became purple. The girl with a smile on her face asked if anyone objected if she made such an exchange of rooms. Without even waiting for an answer, Siesta simply took and left the room, where she immediately saw her younger half-sister. But she didn't say anything to her and simply left. Meanwhile, she approached her brother and father and said that it would be terrible if they left her and went away. So she was next to them. Some time passed from that moment. The Siesta met Jessica, who came out to meet her and told the lady that she had already finished moving her things to the new room. They decided to do this in advance because they were sure that there would be no objections. The girl then thanked her and said that there weren't that many things, so it was good that they dealt with them quickly. Then the maid bowed and said that it was time for her to go. But Siesta stopped her and asked if she really intended to stay in the lower rooms. She thought that it would definitely be uncomfortable for the girl to be there. That's why she said that the bell to call would be too far if she was downstairs, and the girl simply wouldn't hear it, and therefore wouldn't be able to come on time. Jessica then said that she would stand next to him and listen attentively absolutely every minute of her time. But the girl, hearing about this, was very surprised and asked why this was necessary. Siesta was of course pleasantly surprised that this girl was ready to do everything she said. However, she didn't want to torment her like that either. She told her not to do it. After all, she had a better solution. She offered Jessica to live in the next room and was not going to discuss it. Meanwhile, the maid already wanted to object. However, Siesta said that she was the maid of the heir to the title of head of the family. For this reason, the people in the mansion do not think very well of the two of them, and in any case, all this is very difficult. Therefore, she believed that in this way, there would be much less attacks on the girl and she would be able to cope with her duties as best as possible. Therefore, Siesta did not want to hear any excuses. At that moment, Jessica was very amazed and pleasantly surprised because her mistress really saw her as a person, so she wanted to serve her with great joy and loyalty. When the next morning came, Siesta was going downstairs to go and walk in the garden. However, a maid came running to meet her. She screamed loudly and looked very worried. Siesta immediately asked what was wrong and why she was in such a panic. The girl then explained that Mr. Link, the head of the Hakare family, had arrived there. Siesta was very surprised that he arrived and even excited. She didn't know what he wanted and what to expect from this man. She began to descend even lower. And then suddenly she heard a scream, precisely from Link. He was very irritated and asked the men, namely the girl's father and her brother, how many times they needed to repeat it so that they finally understood. He said that he came to meet not Ermel but for Siesta, so he hoped that they would finally let him in to see the girl. After all, he didn't have much time. Siesta had already gone down and saw Link. She immediately smiled and greeted him. The guy paid attention to her and ran to her, not paying attention to the two men who were standing and talking to him a minute ago. He came closer to her and with a smile on his face said that he hadn't managed to talk to her yet. That's why he came, because he really wanted to get to know her better. He glanced at her family and said that it was very difficult to talk to them because they insisted on one thing, although he needed something completely different. So he barely made it to the girl. Siesta smiled and said that in fact she understood him perfectly well because she was not on good terms with them either. So she even sympathized a little. I thought that in order to prevent her from becoming the head of the family, they decided to use the head of the Harkoyan family on their side. This was a completely obvious move on their part. They didn't even intend to tell her about Link's visit. She only found out from Jessica, who noticed the guest. If she hadn't accidentally passed by, she was sure that she would never have been able to meet him. After a short silence, Linka said that it was inconvenient to talk in this place, so he took her by the hand and began to lead her outside, saying that they would be calmer there. They also decided to go out into the city in order to unwind a little and be away from the family. During the siesta, the girl involuntarily followed him, although she didn't even know where he was leading her. They passed by a saleswoman who looked at them without taking her eyes off them, after which she happily smiled and said that this was Baby Link. And after that, she asked who that girl was next to him. The guy was very embarrassed. He started yelling at her and asked her to stop calling him baby, because it was very awkward. The woman was very surprised to hear this and said that he had never been against it, and that she had always called him that and he had not objected. The guy shook his head and laughed, saying that he certainly didn't like it when people addressed him formally. However, that also didn't mean that he needed to be addressed as if he were a small child. The girl looked around and thought that these were the lands of the Karakan, and the inhabitants there were proud of the fact that they earned money through trade, and they were really very good at it. However, passing by the next customers, she heard a whisper behind her back. They were talking about the fact that this was the cursed girl, and were saying various nasty things, even though she could easily hear it. Siesta was shocked that even in a completely different place rumors about her were spread. However, Link also heard these words, and he decided to stand up for the girl. He turned to them and said that if anyone had complaints, he was ready to listen to them and perhaps even take some measures. However, he advised them not to talk behind anyone's back. After all, that's mean. The guy and the girl were very embarrassed. They felt ashamed that they allowed themselves to behave like that and laughed nervously and said that of course they had no complaints. And they also thought it was very sweet that Link decided to stand up for her. The guy, this angered him even more, wanted to approach them and say a few kind words, but Siesta stopped him with her hand. The girl said that they were just brainless fools, that's all. Therefore, she advised him not to get involved with them, because it was impossible to prove anything to these people anyway. The one who was just saying nasty things behind her back heard this and was very indignant. He already wanted to say something like that, but Siesta continued her conversation. She said that only a few could defend their own opinion, while others preferred to believe stupid rumors spread by people who have nothing better to do. She also said that she doesn't think that people with low intelligence will be able to understand this, because they judge people only by their appearance. This was already an appeal directly to the couple who were talking behind her back. So she said that there was no point in even hanging out with them. The guy got very angry when he heard this. He advised her to be careful with her words, otherwise she might get punished for this. Another woman who loved Link very much approached these two and said that he had no right to talk like that about little Link, because he was actually a very important person. Another man who was a local comm also decided to stand up for the guy and the Siesta. He said that these people definitely have no reason to judge him. After this, the woman who stood up for the boy said that the people themselves were to blame for not understanding who was in charge in this village, and because of this, they made such gross and stupid mistakes. They felt very awkward. The woman said in a quiet voice that they were actually guests in this place and were not at all native residents of this city. So she did not understand why there were such complaints about them. However, the woman said that if they were guests, they should definitely behave even more politely than the others. If it weren't for the help for the Hakurin family, they wouldn't even be able to trade, so they owed them everything. But on the contrary, they treated the family member very badly. In fact, everything from the development of distribution channels to the success of the criminals who collected money was all in this city. Meanwhile, people gathered around. They condemned these people because the Hakurin family helped everyone regardless of status, not to mention the rest of the nobility. But they dared to offend the lingo like this. All the residents of the city said that those who consider Mr. Link a fool are their enemies, and it is better for those people not to appear in the city. They were really very cruel and were ready to defend his honor to the end. The couple started to leave. The man said irritably that they would definitely not come back here again because the people in this place were somehow really evil. Siesta, who stood opposite and watched all this, was very surprised. It was common for those who gained power to become heads of families, and she thought that it was because of their power that they had a positive attitude from other residents. However, now that she saw all this, she realized that the Hakurin family was not like that at all. Link was popular among people because of his good nature and ability to communicate well. After this, the girl felt a little sad and she thought that, unlike him, she definitely didn't have any communication with people. Everyone just called her names and humiliated her. The guy, meanwhile, turned to the city residents and said that they were all so worried, although he could have handled it himself so they didn't have to do it at all. The city's multipliers protested and said that if someone was looking down on little Link, they couldn't just remain silent and stand aside. Of course, they wanted to defend his honor and rights. After that, the very first lady who saw Link and greeted him turned her gaze to the Siesta and decided to talk to her. The woman told the girl that those piercing words could not be matched with her graceful features, so she was very amazed by the girl's beautiful wisdom, and because of this, she wanted to thank her. And the man who also stood up for Link agreed with the lady and said that Siesta understood exactly what little Link meant to them and was ready to defend him herself, and they were very pleased about that. Then the guy handed her a whole basket of apples and said that someone like her should be greeted with great honors because she is truly a noble person. Other residents also began to give her various treats, and soon she had collected many baskets. Siesta was surprised that no one despised her as a cursed child. On the contrary, everyone thanked her and was very happy. The girl decided that she should behave and act the same way as Link, and then everything would definitely be fine. However, she did not know too much about these people from her city, and for this reason she needed to get to know them better. Some time has passed since then. Link took half of the things that the residents gave him, and they only reached a small cafe to drink tea. Siesta was actually very tired, and even tea did not lift her spirits and energy. Then, suddenly Linka noticed that she looked very sad and asked if her hands were okay. The girl replied that everything was fine. Moreover, she definitely couldn't complain about the gifts, because these people were so kind, and she was very happy that everything happened this way. Siesta still couldn't get used to the fact that she was previously despised, and now she was even thanked. She was confused. The girl didn't understand the logic of these people at all. But still, she was still a little happy, so thinking about it, the girl's mood even improved, and she smiled. Link noticed this, and he also smiled and said that he was actually very glad that they met, which is why he brought her to this place. The girl was very surprised to hear this. However, the guy stood up from his seat and pointed back and said that the girl could rest there, and she thanked him for this because it would really be too hard to return home with all these bags. But at that moment, a little girl who was playing nearby accidentally dropped her ball. It rolled out onto the road, and of course she ran after it. Because the girl was still very small, she did not notice that it was a roadway, and for this reason did not see how the horses were rushing straight towards her. She found herself in great danger. Siesta immediately stood up from her seat. She slammed her hands on the table and shouted loudly, asking the girl to be careful. Link also noticed this. He understood that he needed to act quickly, so we use our magical air abilities. He lifted the carriage up and was able to save the baby. The child herself, meanwhile, bent down, screamed loudly, and burst into tears. But when she realized that the trouble had passed, she ran to meet her mother. The girl continued to cry loudly. She hugged her mother, and Link, meanwhile, was very pleased with his work. He looked at them and even smiled. He was glad that everything was okay. At that moment, something bad happened to his abilities, and horses started falling from the air straight at him. The guy was very surprised. He didn't expect that he wouldn't be able to withstand it with his strength. Siesta, meanwhile, noticed this terrible situation. She was also afraid for Linko, so she ran towards him and wanted to push him off the road. The guy at the same time also began to run away because he understood that the horse was rushing very fast. Luckily, Siesta ran up in time, grabbed his hand, and used her magic to move them from that place altogether. She moved them nearby to the street, and then the girl suddenly heard a loud cry from the seller, who saw that the horse was rushing straight at him. The girl was very scared. She understood that she had to stop this horse so that no one would get hurt. The girl already wanted to use her magical abilities, but she didn't have time because Link got ahead of her. He lifted the horse up in the air and put it aside where there were no more people. After that, the guy quickly ran up to the frightened girl and the man the horse was flying at and asked if everything was okay with them, because he was really worried. Siesta stood aside at that moment. She thought that Link was completely different from her. He blinded her like the sun, and the girl could no longer think about anything else. However, she was torn away from her thoughts by the guy himself. He had already talked to the residents and returned to the girl. He thanked her for being able to save him. He explained that if he had stumbled even once, she would have been in real danger. But Siesta suddenly looked at him with an aromatic gaze and said that he shouldn't have thought about it, and that it would be best to just forget about this situation and leave it in the past. But the guy said that in no case he was convinced of this, only now that it was very important that all this happened, and he was really incredibly grateful. After that, Link, smiling with all his teeth, said that she could definitely be relied upon, and he was very happy about this. The girl, hearing this, was very surprised and asked what he meant. And the guy explained that she lives like an aristocrat and at the same time does what she wants and not society. She can stand up for herself and defend her rights. The man said that he had heard that Ido was also doing this, but Fiesta drew his attention to the fact that he was not even an aristocrat. The guy did not deny this and said that he was very sorry that the aristocracy had such orders that were simply terrible. But the man, smiling happily, said that in fact he did it for a reason. But in order to see smiling people, you see the smile on their faces. He always loved it, and it brought him real pleasure. So he also looked for his own benefit in it. Siesta immediately giggled when she heard this. Link saw it and beamed with happiness. He said that it was the way she smiled that he knew he could definitely count on her. He was very glad that he managed to make her smile. The girl then looked at him in surprise. Kalinka continued the conversation. He asked if it was true what he had heard about her being a cursed child, and also added that it was very surprising that they were always close but never crossed paths with each other. The girl didn't answer this. She thought about the fact that at their first meeting, when she was still in her estate, the guy took her hand without any hesitation or thought. This didn't surprise her much. However, now she thought about it and realized that it was quite strange. Therefore, Siesta did not find anything better than to tell the boy that he was changing. Link, hearing this, was very scared and immediately asked if he had already become just like Ido. But Siesta replied that she didn't think it would be right to compare him to him. And after that, she suddenly asked if he really didn't like Ido. The guy then thought about it and then sighed heavily and said that perhaps it looked as if they were at odds. But in reality, it was not so. That they met alone many times because they had a pretty good relationship with each other. However, there still seemed to be some kind of wall between them, and communication was sometimes difficult. He suddenly felt very uncomfortable with this conversation, and he said that in fact this is what he wanted to talk about. After that, he looked into his pocket and took out a purple stone. He showed it to the girl and said that it was a magical siesta crystal. When she saw it, she was very surprised. But the guy explained that this thing was dropped during the ball. He assumed that something was sealed in it before it was dropped. In other words, it was not an accident. They saw monsters that someone had summoned intentionally. The problem was that this someone was invited by Mrs. Vivian herself, and it was probably a high-ranking aristocrat about whom everyone had a very good opinion. Link said that only someone special could hunt Lady Vivian, and that the 3 Great Count families should investigate this matter anyway, because it was really very suspicious. The girl, hearing about this, was very surprised. She thought that despite the fact that Link did not look like an aristocrat, he was still quite capable in the role of the head of the family and did an excellent job. After a short silence, Siesta asked if he could leave this crystal to her. The guy, hearing this, was very surprised and asked why she needed it, because he didn't really want to give it up. But the girl explained that she had an offer from someone who could bring it, and if they provide evidence, then he definitely won't get away with it. In fact, she knew perfectly well who the criminal was. She saw him before she saved her brother during the third reincarnation. Link, after some time of thought, said that he understood everything, and in that case, he was ready to give this stone to her. If she found out something, he would like her to tell him urgently. The girl smiled and said that he could be absolutely calm. She definitely would not let him down. After that, she took the stone and thanked him for it. Then, Link remembered that he had to run back to the palace, and, leaving the girl, he said that he would write to her again, so he did not say goodbye. Siesta was a little surprised. She didn't understand what he wanted. However, after some time, the guy returned again. He already had a small bundle in his hands. The man explained that it was a letter of approval, and asked if it was true that she was supposed to become the head of the family. He explained to her that this could really help her. The girl looked at the guy cautiously and asked if she could really accept it. The guy immediately gave it to her and said that of course, because he was on her side, so she definitely could not lose in this fight for the legacy. Siesta immediately thanked him, and with a smile on her face said that of course a letter of recommendation from him could not go unnoticed, so it would really help her a lot. However, she also said that she also had a problem with Ada. Link agreed with her and said that he was an aristocrat to the core and therefore had already tired everyone of his politeness and rules. Hearing this, the girl was a little surprised. However, then she said that if she could do something for him, then he could only say. Although she did not want to interfere, she would definitely try to do everything in her power to help him because he helped her. Some time passed since then, and Ido learned that Link had sent a letter of recommendation. But the guy was practically not surprised by this because he should have expected this from the boy. The guy thought about the fact that, of course, the very first force had awakened in him. However, the force of that girl shone and stood out among all the others, so it was quite obvious that she could cause a lot of excitement. Because of this, Ido became very sad. He did not understand why this did not happen to him, because the guy so craved attention to himself. He received a rather fascinating letter, and, putting it aside, the guy understood perfectly well that he would be especially eagerly awaiting a response. As the ruler of the Elcor, he must be an example for people, including maintaining relationships with the current heads of the families. The guy also thought that if she somehow became the head of the family, then he had to think carefully about everything and make his own decision. Meanwhile, Siesta was sitting in her office. She was reading the letter and thought that he was a really close friend of his father and brother, so it would not be easy for her to find favor with Ado. She thought about what she could come up with in order to win him over to her side. The girl really didn't know and was a little upset about it. But at that moment, Jessica came into her room. She told the lady that she had received an invitation to tea from Mr. Ido. She handed her this paper, and as soon as Siesta saw it, she was genuinely surprised. She didn't know that he decided to start the game first, however, this actually made her happy. Then the girl read this letter. But suddenly her father came into her room. He turned to her and asked what she was planning. Did she really want to become the heir of a Hakurine or an Elcor? He also asked what she was busy with discipline. The girl then looked at her sister who was hiding behind his back and, laughing, decided to answer him after all. She said that she couldn't believe that it was her father who decided to say it. She asked if he was really thinking about which of the two families to marry Ermel to. The man asked her irritably what she saw as so wrong about this, but the girl replied that a cursed child could not be of any use, and therefore she assumed that he had taken an adopted daughter. Siesta was completely calm. She asked the man, wasn't he trying his best to sell his adopted daughter to two ducal families? This was a very obvious move on his part. The woman also said that he does not want to make things worse for the Hanton family, and for this reason he is trying his best to do what they think is right. Father looked at her with disdain but said nothing, because Ermel came forward and decided to address her sister herself. She asked her sister if she could take her with her to tea with the Elcor master, but Siesta was not at all surprised to hear this, because this is exactly what she expected to hear. But the man frowned and decided to say his final word, and said that since she would have expected this, then in that case Ermel could also go to this tea party. The girl smiled and asked if he had heard wrong, and said that she was the one who received the invitation, so she did not understand how Ermel could go there. The man sighed heavily and said that he could not even imagine that Siesta could behave with dignity in high society, so it was a forced measure. The girl began to get a little irritated by this. She said that the man spoke as if he could treat her like trash and not let her out of the castle as if she were a prisoner. Then Siesta looked at her sister, who was very scared. She thought about the fact that the girl said that she wanted to improve the relationship, but at the same time she always continued to listen to her father's opinion and did not have her own. Therefore, she thought about whether this was really Ermel's desire. She could not understand the whole truth and even began to doubt, since her father could easily convince her that she needed to communicate with her sister. So after a short silence, she turned to her sister and said that if she really wanted to, she could go with her. Ermel, hearing about this, immediately beamed with joy. She thanked the girl with all her heart and was ready to pack her things in a minute. Some time passed from that moment, and Siesta left the room with Jessica. She had some more things to do. As soon as they moved away from the hall, Siesta turned to the maid. She told the girl that the garden would be opened for tea, so it would be easy for a mess to arise. Jessica replied that she could pretend to be a servant at the Elcor residence and hide there in order to keep a close eye on things and, if necessary, immediately help. Siesta immediately stopped, and looking at her precious maid, she smiled. She told the girl that she was a great girl after all. As expected, she knows how to grasp thoughts on the fly. So the girl said that at the meeting place she would have to leave the butterflies. So she asked the girl to let her know if something happened. Jessica immediately said that she understood everything and also asked that the lady be careful and monitor everything carefully. If she sensed danger, then immediately take action. Siesta replied that this time she would take the initiative. For this reason, the girl Milk would definitely not worry. Everything would be under control. When several hours had passed since that moment, the girl and her sister had changed their clothes and were already heading to Edo. The girls were in rather beautiful modest dresses, and as soon as they approached the desired destination, the other ladies saw them and immediately began to whisper among themselves. Veronica, who was passing by Siesta, immediately said that her last name attracts so much attention, and she even said with a mocking voice that she was incredibly jealous of this. Although in fact, this was not so. As soon as she saw that the girl did not react to this in any way, she immediately caught up with her and asked if she had really said something wrong. Siesta looked at her with disdain and said that this was exactly how she didn't want the girl to talk to her like that in the future. She explained that she was blackening the name of this family and that it was forever. She also asked Veronica if she remembered what everyone used to call her. Veronica continued to insist on her own. She was very hurt by the girl's words and she raised her voice and asked if it would really be rude for her to call her like everyone else around her. But Siesta said that she could do it calmly, because this nickname had firmly stuck with her. For this reason, she no longer reacted to it at all. Then, Veronica finally called her a cursed child. Ermel, meanwhile, came closer to the girl and said that this estate was simply amazing. She walked away for a short while to look around the surroundings. Veronica looked at her with disdain as soon as she saw her. However, the girl soon quickly smiled and said that there was definitely no need to come to a girl that no one cared about. As soon as Ermel heard this, she was very surprised. She even got scared and could not answer anything because she had never been humiliated before. But Veronica continued to humiliate her and said that apparently Ermel only knew how to flatter people and also asked why the daughter of a girl of easy virtue imagined herself to be rich. She definitely did not deserve any status. The other ladies who were standing around and heard this immediately laughed loudly. And Ermel felt very uncomfortable and wanted to get away from all this. Siesta decided to intervene in this whole conversation. She said that some time ago, she would not have even thought that such a manner of communication could be addressed to a member of one of the 3 families of the Great Dukes. And looking at Veronica, she asked if this really meant that her status was higher than that of other dukes, and if she really thought so, then she should be a member of the royal family. Therefore, slowly drawing out each word, Siesta asked the girl to name herself one more time, because perhaps she had misremembered her identity, and because of this, there was a misunderstanding. Veronica, meanwhile, was very offended. Of course, she understood that she was wrong, but she certainly wasn't going to admit it. So she only told the girl not to forget who she was talking to. And after that, she left with her friends. After this, Siesta sighed heavily and thought that these annoying ladies would never give her peace of mind. But at that moment, other aristocrats approached her. One of them said that, as expected, the girl managed to put Mrs. Veronica in her place. Only a true heir to the title of head of the family could do so. They sincerely admired her. As soon as Siesta saw such attention towards herself, she was very surprised. However, she answered these ladies with a smile, and they started a conversation. Meanwhile, Armel stood nearby and watched everything that was happening. After a short silence, she decided to intervene in their conversations and said that she would like Siesta to officially become the heir to the title. She believed that it would be absolutely fair. Siesta didn't answer this. She suddenly saw the silhouette that she saw at the ball. This silhouette was near the window, and this interested her very much and attracted the girl's attention. Then, Siesta began to look around and thought that the goal was not at all what she imagined it to be, and then she finally saw Jessica, who was standing not far from her and was dressed like a maid. The girl knew that she had to warn her about something. So as she passed by, she said that she used the butterflies so that she could get into the Elcor's residence. She also said that she would take advantage of any opportunity. Jessica was a little worried. However, she told the lady that the girl could leave everything else to her. She would do everything as needed. Meanwhile, she immediately went to the estate in order to finally fulfill the order of her mistress. And all the other ladies went towards the gazebo. Edo also headed towards the gazebo. He already saw countless butterflies that fluttered around in the garden and immediately thought that perhaps it was her power. The man thought that it was very easy to catch a girl who had penetrated. It would not require much effort, so he decided to check what Siesta was capable of and already saw her among the other ladies. The girl, meanwhile, was chatting with other aristocrats. And as soon as Edo suddenly approached her, she was immediately distracted by him. The man came closer to her and said that he was very grateful that she had come that day and also asked if she had had a good time. Siesta, seeing him, immediately recognized him, bowed, made a curtsy and said that she was very happy and also that she was grateful to him for the invitation. The man also bowed slightly in greeting and said that without a doubt, she would be the next head of the family. It was as obvious as day. After that, he looked the girl straight in the eyes and said that he thought it would be a good idea to strengthen their friendship, and so he decided to take responsibility for it. After this, the man extended his hand to her and, hearing this, she thought that until she received his approval, it would be difficult to become the head of the family. And knowing this, he asked her how she was going to act. Therefore, in this case, the girl decided to do it her way. She ignored his hand and simply walked past. Ado was very surprised to see this reaction. He immediately turned to her and asked what happened wrong. But the girl continued to leave and replied that she was not going to make a scandal or show her mood because she was invited by the head of the Elkova family, the magnificent aristocrat. Therefore, she believed that it would be wrong for them not to take advantage of this opportunity, so she wanted to thank him for his help. The girl went to the center of the gazebo and bowed, and did so. As soon as Ido heard this, he was very surprised at first because he did not expect that the girl could be much braver than he had assumed. However, in the end, she turned out to be a worthy opponent. As soon as the man heard this greeting, he immediately began to smile. However, Mrs. Veronica suddenly ran up to him and asked the man to move away from this terrible girl. Ado, hearing her voice, immediately looked at the girl in surprise. He didn't think that she would want to interfere in his conversations and affairs. Veronica said that she saw when the girl entered his chambers, it was probably she who stole that rose-shaped brooch. The people who were present around and heard this information were sincerely amazed. Of course, they believed the words of the lady, and because of this, they were even more surprised. Well, Ado asked her to calm down, because there was no need to raise all this unnecessary noise, and he didn't want her to make a mountain out of a molehill. But Veronica continued this argument. She screamed loudly so that absolutely everyone could hear and told the gentleman that he definitely shouldn't have trusted people like Siesta. She also said that this girl misunderstood his kindness at the ball, and that is why she finally showed her status as an arrogant, cursed child. Then she pointed towards the Ermels and told everyone around to look at them. They are not related by blood at all, but for some unknown reason they imagine themselves to be real sisters and walk around bragging. As soon as Ermel heard this, she immediately became sad again. She also saw how many glances were now directed in her direction, and because of this, her whole face turned red. Siesta, meanwhile, having heard all this, became even more angry at Veronica. She was sincerely sick of people who could immediately start insulting others without even having any reason to do so. She didn't even doubt that for Veronica such actions were like the meaning of life. She was one of those people who cut off her own air supply, so the girl only smiled happily. Veronica. As soon as she saw her self-confident smile, she immediately screamed again. She said that this was the best proof that the Siesta had no excuses. She pointed her hand in her direction and told Mr. Ida that the Henton sisters definitely had no place in this respectful society. Meanwhile, Jessica stood among all these people and listened to these terrible words. She was amazed that such things could be said towards the lady, the most beautiful girl who was sincerely kind. Siesta glanced at her and saw her angry and worried expression. She understood perfectly well that if this continued, the girl would definitely not be able to stand it and would join in. But fortunately, Ido himself intervened in the conversation. He came forward and asked the lady of Siesta if Veronica was really telling the truth. The girl then looked at him and with a smile on her face said that perhaps this was so, and asked how one could not believe Lady Veronica if she said that she saw everything. At the same time, Veronica began to smile happily. She understood that the girl herself decided to stay and said that the stolen brooch was eventually found in the hater's carriage. The man started to approach this Korean woman and said that they cannot accuse someone based only on suspicions, so he believed that they should check this fact and only then draw some conclusions. They all went straight there. The man entered the carriage first and began to examine it carefully. This took him some time. Some time passed by then. He carefully searched the carriage. And then, looking out the window, he said that he had checked every corner but had found nothing. Veronica was very angry when she heard this because she was absolutely sure of her theory, so she climbed into the carriage and decided to see what was there herself. She got out of it pretty quickly and was very surprised the girl screamed, saying that this couldn't be because there was definitely a brooch under the seat. Veronica didn't understand how this could happen. However, Siesta turned to Mr. Ido and asked anxiously, "Could it really be that someone stole his birthday?" The man said that it was true. I don't know. It was definitely impossible to get into the room of the Elcor's mansion, so he assumed that the man was very well prepared. After he explained this, I headed to the mansion and said that they would check the room, and also asked the lady if they could wait a little for him to do this. The girls, of course, did not object, and in the meantime, Hay went inside and searched everything there, after which he went outside again. The man looked a little surprised. However, the guy extended his hand and pointed to a small decoration that was there. He said that circumstances had changed, and the brooch ended up in his room. The man smiled and said that this brooch was made to order. He had never worn it before, so the gentleman present in this place could not definitely see it and confirm that it was indeed this one. Then he came closer to Veronica and looking straight into her eyes, said that only the one who entered his room knew him. The woman, hearing these words, was very surprised because she was worried. The girl couldn't stay on her feet. She fell to her knees and pretended to cry and that she was deeply sorry that this had happened. Veronica also said in a trembling voice that she had simply gotten into the wrong room and decided to punish the arrogant individuals. That's all. At this point, Siesta also decided to enter into this dialogue. She came closer to her and told the girl that she could not prove that she was in the wrong room and even called her a conceited woman. Veronica, hearing this, immediately wiped the fake tears from her face and looked at her with all her hatred. Then Veronica screamed and said that it was all true. She looked at Mr. Ito and asked him to believe her because there was no point in her lying and she certainly would not have done that. The man sighed heavily and said that fortunately the brooch had been stolen from me this time and that he had no claims against her, so she didn't have to worry so much. However, The next time he warned her that there would definitely not be such trust in her. Therefore, he wished that she would be careful in the future, otherwise serious consequences would await her. Veronica meanwhile remained sitting on the ground and the man simply left. The people who heard this whole conversation began to talk among themselves. One of the girls was very surprised. She said that she would really like Veronica to stop pretending to be a victim. She did it all the time, and it was starting to annoy everyone around her. Her friend agreed with her and said that Veronica didn't even think to apologize to her sisters for accusing them, and also saying a lot of unpleasant things. Veronica by that time had already started to cry for real because her whole plan had failed, and everything had not gone as she thought. So the girl stood up and simply ran away from them all. At the same time, Irma looked at her sister. She already wanted to tell her something, but Siesta, smiling, said that they had already put her in her place so they could already return home and suggested going to the carriage. And immediately they began to leave. But then suddenly Ido came closer to her and addressed the girl. He wanted to say a few words to her at the end. The man said that he was very sorry that his invitation turned into nothing but trouble for her. He could not even imagine that such a thing could happen. Siesta smiled and said that if the man was going to apologize, then he should have apologized to Irma. She was already used to this, and that's why she didn't even pay attention to all these stupid accusations against her. He immediately smiled and expected approximately the same answer from the girl. But then he said that one maid whom he had not met before had merged with the others, and he assumed that this girl served directly to eat and asked if he was right. Siesta smiled and said that she simply assumed that someone might appear who wouldn't like her very much, and that it was a common occurrence, so she simply had to take such security measures. But then, in a quieter voice, she also said that she had not managed to catch the one she wanted. Ado heard this and immediately became even more interested in the girl. He smiled and said that she was no longer the lady he had met before, the self-proclaimed heir to the title of head of the family. She had really changed over all this time, and he had seen her growth. Smiling, she said that she was very flattered by his praise, and she really enjoyed hearing these words for some time. They stood near the carriage and talked about various details. Finishing the conversation, Ido extended his hand to her and said that he believed that now he definitely wanted to have friendly relations with her. Not only with Hans, but also with her as well. So he hoped that she had the same desire. After hearing this, she thought for a while, but then she finally responded to his handshake and agreed to this deal. However, to her surprise, the man suddenly grabbed her by the wrist. It was quite strong. He even pulled himself closer to him. The girl panicked a lot. She touched his chest with her hand and tried to push away. Ado moved even closer to her and whispered in her ear, asking if she could remove those butterflies that he had released from his mind. He was not at all embarrassed by the fact that he had pulled the girl against her will, and so close at that. The girl pulled her hand away from him and said in a quiet voice that he had noticed after all. The man heard this phrase and immediately smiled, because that was exactly what he thought, and she had not even suspected it. He looked into her eyes and said that she saw Lady Veronica in the mansion and outwitted her, and also asked if this assumption was correct. Siesta didn't answer this at first. She understood perfectly well that the man wouldn't leave her alone, so she waved her hand and made all the butterflies disappear and said that everything was completely different from what he thought. The man then said that the strength of the Hanton family was changing, and one could not remain careless. For this reason, he must, of course, conduct such inspections. At that moment, Siesta took out a small crystal that had been in her pocket all this time. She said that it was too late to worry about it now and also asked if this thing looked familiar to him. The man, as soon as he saw this crystal, was at first a little surprised and said that it was just some kind of fragment of a magic stone. He did not see anything special in it, but Siesta told him not to pretend on the day of the ball. She released butterflies that were able to show her everything that they see, and for this reason she knows very well that while protecting the guests from the monsters, he deftly scattered them in parallel around. As soon as Ido heard this, he immediately panicked, but in fact, Siesta knew this a long time ago, because monsters never appear in large numbers without some reason. In order not to be eaten by monsters once again, the girl released butterflies that transmitted information to her in advance, and for this reason she could calmly control the process around her. The monsters immediately after their appearance ran to Mrs. Vivian, who came out to greet the guests. At that moment, Ado was throwing out magic crystals. He did it unnoticed, so none of the guests paid attention. In fact, the Swan Prince, who is admired by absolutely everyone, really did this dirty trick, and for this reason the girl decided to have this serious conversation with him. Siesta said that this was just one side of his coin. She thought that he was hunting for Miss Vivian from the beginning, but in that case he would have placed the crystals up the stairs. However, he did not do so, and therefore he cannot deny that he did everything himself. He acted as the master hunted the man under the stairs, and Siesta with a smile on her face asked if her assumption was correct. He immediately became wary. However, the girl continued to speak and said that the guy really was well aware of the power that had appeared in the young Link and asked if this was true. At that moment, Ido became completely angry. His expression quickly changed and he no longer looked so innocent and defenseless. Siesta looked him straight in the eye and told him not to make such a frightened face. She was not going to tarnish his impeccable reputation. The man immediately asked what she wanted in that case because he was very worried about it. The girl then laughed sincerely and asked if he still hadn't understood. Seeing the surprised expression on his face, she said that she would like to receive a letter of recommendation so that she could become the head of the family. Kino, hearing about this, was even more surprised, but Siesta said that he should preserve the image of the Swan Prince in this way, and she would receive a letter of recommendation, so everyone would win. And she considered this proposal very good. She extended her hand forward to him and asked if it was true that it was important for heads of families to help each other. Ado, having heard all this, understood perfectly well that this girl would become a serious obstacle for him. However, the man understood that if he fulfilled her conditions, Hans would leave him aside. It was simply an unbearable choice. He did not know what to do because, in all cases, he was the loser. He was very angry. However, in the end, he sighed heavily and said that he understood her. In other words, she was not going to leave even after what Lady Veronica did. In the end, she turned out to be even much more cunning than he had imagined, and this delighted the man. Siesta asked the man not to speak badly to that girl and suggested ending the whole situation by simply leaving her aside peacefully. The man then shook his head, turned around, and started to leave. He asked her to wait for a while. In the meantime, he would prepare for her the letter of recommendation they had agreed on. Siesta did not revive and said that she would wait. Some time passed since then. The man quickly wrote the necessary paper and returned to her. He handed her this form and asked if this option was right for her. Before giving an answer, Siesta decided to look at it. She quickly read it and was a little surprised. She thought that he could formulate the wording in such a way that she would be at a disadvantage. However, her fears turned out to be in vain, and this letter of recommendation turned out to be very good. The girl looked at him and said that their negotiations could be completed. She would remain silent about what he had done, and she also thanked him for this letter. But before leaving, she touched his chest with her finger and, coming closer, said, looking him straight in the eyes so that next time he would no longer summon these terrible monsters at balls, she said that this should never happen again, and her voice sounded very stern. The man understood that there would be serious consequences if he broke this rule. In fact, Siesta held back so that he would get what he deserved. Ido smiled and said that he understood every word she said, so she didn't have to worry. The girl turned around and started to leave. She said that he had made a wise decision and also added that it was time for her to go. Ado remained standing in his place for a while. He thought that this girl could really be quite dangerous, so he decided to be careful. However, at that moment, Hans ran up to him from behind, turned to his friend and asked if Siesta had come to this place. The guy immediately said that she had come. However, she had just left the estate. Hans then asked the guy not to tell him that he had given her a letter of recommendation. The man also said that only an idiot like Hokurane would recommend her without thinking about the future, and he said that he really hoped that his friend was not like that and that he thought about the consequences. Ido was a little embarrassed. He understood that he had set up his friend. However, he said that he was against it just like Hans, and perhaps even more against all of this. As soon as Guns heard this, he immediately panicked a little and asked his friend why he was saying all this in the past tense. It was hard for the man to believe that this had really happened. Therefore, he did not want to acknowledge this fact. Ado then said that she showed him her talent, and he had no choice but to recommend her. The Elcor cannot afford to choose favorites. For this reason, he simply had no choice. Guns heard this and became very angry. He started yelling at his friend, asking why everything happened like this because he was supposed to be the head of the family. However, now it was almost impossible. In fact, the guy was very jealous of her compared to her. His voice was almost inaudible. This nasty feeling of loss was stuck inside him, and he could not get rid of it. Because of this, the man was very angry. However, Ido said that it was a pity because he said that it would be fun for both of them to be heads of families and stand shoulder to shoulder. He looked at his friend in surprise and asked if this really meant that Hans was ready to just give up and give the initiative to his sister, who hadn't even fought for the place. The guy, hearing all this, seemed to go crazy. An image of his sister immediately appeared in his head. He grabbed his head and screamed loudly. He kept repeating that this could not have happened. He also said that position in society, power, money, all of this should belong to him, and not to this lousy Siesta. Ado immediately said that everything was right. If they struck before she took everything, the guy could become the winner, so he can worry about me. At that moment, he looked Hans straight in the eyes and thus managed to influence his friend. The guy was silent for a while, trying to understand what was going on and what he needed to answer. However, then he smiled and said that everything was right. Defeat after victory, that's exactly what should happen. Suddenly, he began to laugh loudly and joyfully and said that he definitely could not allow this sister to leave him with nothing, so he was ready to fight to the end. After some time, he returned to the palace and thought about the fact that if it were not for Siesta, then he would have calmly taken the place of the head of the family. The situation that they now had was very strange, and because of this, the man was confused. Hans thought that he simply had to do it as it should be, and he was not stopped by these evil thoughts and the consequences that could happen after what he had planned. Meanwhile, Siesta finally returned to the palace where she was immediately met by the maids. They bowed and greeted her. Eventually, Siesta received letters of recommendation from both families, and the number of aristocrats who supported her also increased. The girl also thought that if Mrs. Vivian approved her candidacy at the succession ceremony, then she would finally become the head of the family. And this is exactly what the girl was actively seeking. She still had very little time left, and she would finally truly become who she always dreamed of being. At that very time, she headed to her room and did not think about anything else. And then suddenly, the girl didn't even notice how a huge white statue began to fall on her head. Siesta continued to walk further. And she didn't even suspect that just a little bit, and she could die. But fortunately, the fair-haired man was able to notice this first. He shouted loudly, addressing the girl and telling her to be careful. Siesta was very surprised. She looked in the direction from where the voice came, and a second later, the man threw her to the ground, moving her away from the statue that was falling. The girl looked at him in surprise. She even hit her head a little because it all happened so quickly and unexpectedly. The man, meanwhile, could not take his eyes off her. He turned to Lady Siesta and asked if she was injured. He was very worried about her, and also extended his hand to help her stand up. In fact, she found out who it was. This man was the leader of the soldier detachment, and his name was Nicholas. And he had just saved her because Siesta, getting to her feet, saw how the statue landed and broke into small pieces. She took his hand and began to get up as well. She said that everything was fine with her. The man was sincerely happy and said that it was very good. Then Nicholas began to accompany her to the side and said that someone had dropped a bronze statue from the roof, and he assumed that this person had apparently been aiming at the girl. Siesta immediately raised her head up in the hope that she would be able to see this criminal, but she could not notice anything and only thought about the fact that if they had hit her right, there would not have been a living place left of her. Nicholas suddenly stopped and, looking straight into her eyes, asked if it was true that she had declared herself the next head of the family at the ball. The girl nodded her head as a sign of agreement. The man then thought about it and said that he was worried that there would be people who were unhappy with this factor, and Mrs. Vivian was also actively worried about the girl because her life was now in danger. He suddenly sat down to take a closer look at this statue and said that he was patrolling the area in this place and he certainly could not imagine that something like this could happen there. He looked closely at this statuette and then said that he thought it belonged to her brother. The girl, hearing this, became very angry because she understood that he was again trying to get rid of her as she was before her new rebirth and change in thinking, and she didn't even know what she could do about it. Nicholas said that a real brother would never do something like that. He would not put his sister's life in danger. However, this man was apparently ready to do anything to achieve his goal. In fact, this situation angered him no less than Siesta. However, the girl sighed heavily and said that for her family this was a common thing, so she was not even surprised. The man then asked her for forgiveness. He said that if he had noticed something bad earlier, then perhaps all of this would not have happened. Well, Siesta, hearing this, was very surprised. She said that strange things had happened before and asked, hadn't he already saved her once? After all, she clearly remembered this. Well, Nicholas bowed and said that unfortunately this was not the case. No matter how hard he tried, he could not understand that something was wrong with her, and that is why he was very sorry that he was so inattentive. The man also said that he was definitely ready to protect her. Now he felt his duty to the girl and wanted to fulfill it. Siesta, hearing this, was very surprised. She immediately remembered a moment from their childhood. How once they also stood opposite each other, and a man said something similar. She didn't understand what kind of memories they were that appeared for only a moment and then suddenly disappeared, and this made her a little worried. She looked at Nicholas and thought that this man had cared for her before in her past incarnations, and he was a true knight and the kindest character she had ever met. Therefore, smiling sincerely, the girl thanked him with all her heart and said that she was really very grateful to him for the care and kindness that he showed to her. The man became wary again and said that this time he would thoroughly investigate the situation and would definitely reveal the whole truth, but until that time he was ready to provide her with a special shelter so that something like this would never happen. But Siesta immediately refused this. She turned around and started to leave, saying that it was not at all intentional to run away from everyone. Nicholas had already started to object. However, the girl interrupted him and said that this time she would definitely be able to handle it herself. Therefore, he did not need to worry. He could go about his business. After that, she said that it was time for her to leave, and the girl went into the estate, leaving Nicholas alone outside. As soon as Siesta returned home, she was incredibly angry at her brother. It was hard for her to believe that just a few days before the inheritance ceremony, Hans, without remorse, tried to harm her. But everything did not go as he wanted. The girls still managed to escape, and finally some time passed from that moment, and the day of the inheritance ceremony came. Something they both had been waiting for so long. Hans was incredibly angry that day. He understood perfectly well that his chances had significantly decreased, and because of this he was very afraid. And besides, when his plan failed, he was very upset. Meanwhile, Siesta was sitting in her room and preparing for this ceremony with Jessica. The maid smiled happily and told her mistress that she was very glad that this day had finally come. Siesta was wearing a rather beautiful, strict black and white dress. She turned to the maid and said that thanks to her support, everything happened without incident and she was very grateful to her. However, the girl also said that it was still too early to relax. She was sure that her brother and father would not give up so easily, so they had to stay on guard. And Siesta was completed very seriously. She was not going to give up her place, much less say goodbye to her life, so she was ready to defend everything she could until the end. Meanwhile, a lot of people had already gathered in the hall. Mrs. Vivian was sitting on her throne and waiting for the future heirs. The knight who stood next to her said that all three families of the Grand Dukes had finally arrived so they could begin the ceremony. And it was really so. Ado walked ahead, Siesta stood next to him, and Link was already third. They were very serious and headed straight to Lady Vivian. And when the girl began to come closer, she glanced at the knights who lined up on the sides and saw Nicholas. Their glances crossed, and the girl became a little embarrassed. She quickly turned her head away and pretended that she hadn't seen anything, but Nicholas himself, looking down, blushed a little and began to smile. He was pleased that nothing had happened to her during this time, because he was really very worried. When all three came close enough, Vivienne said that they were already starting the inheritance ceremony, after which she turned to the head of the Hunton family and asked him to bring the heirs forward. Father quickly approached the siesta. He took her by the hand and really led her forward. However, they were very angry with each other and did not even say a single word. Vivienne turned to the girl and said that she heard that she had received letters of recommendation from Link and Ido, and also asked if it was true. Having bowed, the girl said that everything was exactly like that. Then the Empress smilingly replied that she was interested in looking at who they both trusted. And after that, she turned to Alias and asked what he thought about this. Of course, Siesta couldn't even imagine that her father would agree with these kind words, so she assumed that now was the time for him to express his disagreement and make a scandal as always. However, to her great surprise, the man bowed and said that he had kept his daughter's beauty away from the public eye. However, he had no intention of hiding it forever. The man said that as soon as he heard his daughter's desire to become the head of the family, he was upset. However, he believed that she could definitely be trusted. She was his responsible child. It was only because of parental love that he did not allow her to do this. However, he calmly thought everything over and decided to respect his daughter's will. For this reason, he made his final decision. Link, as soon as he heard this, immediately became wary, because as soon as he came to the castle, this man was discussed in his best light, so he could not understand at all what kind of parental love this man was talking about. However, she turned to him and said that of course all the hardest things can be entrusted to girls. Her late mother said exactly the same thing, so she is glad that Siesta still dared and made this choice. The girls agreed with her and said that Mrs. Vivienne rules the country not only as a queen, but also as the Holy Virgin. And smiling, he added that even if he looked at Vivienne closely, his thoughts would definitely not change. The girl then said that his words encouraged her, and she thought about all this. Meanwhile, Siesta looked angrily at her father. She didn't understand what kind of farce this was. She assumed that he had something evil in mind, and for this reason he had suddenly changed his thinking. However, here, he suddenly knelt down in front of Mrs. Vivienne and said that he would like to take the opportunity to give his daughter an item that is passed down in their family to each new head from generation to generation. He asked the Empress if she could allow him to do this. Vivienne immediately smiled and said that of course he could do it. Moreover, she also declared Siesta the head of the family, and for this reason everything was already official. The girl herself thought about what subject her father was talking about. She had never heard of something being passed down from generation to generation, and at that moment the man took out that same golden bracelet from his pocket. Because of this bracelet, her magic power was sealed, and Siesta could not believe that this was happening again. Now she finally understood what the matter was. The beautiful words he had just spoken were in order to put this bracelet on her, and ultimately seal her powers forever. The man smiled happily and told his daughter to let him put it on her hand. After that, he unceremoniously grabbed her wrist and did all this very roughly. The girl, of course, didn't like all this. She started to push herself away and said that she didn't agree to this. The father asked why she refused. After all, if she put it on, she could finally become the head of the family, so he didn't understand what she wasn't happy with. Well, as soon as he tried to put it on her wrist, she hit it hard with her hand and the bracelet flew far away. The girl screamed loudly at her father and told him to stop already. Everyone present in the hall, as soon as they saw this, were very shocked. They immediately began to whisper and discuss this situation among themselves. People did not understand why the girl did this, but the father of the siesta was very pleased in the meantime. He smiled slightly but quickly removed this grin from his face, because he had to play his role. The man sighed tragically and asked his daughter what she was doing, after which he turned to everyone present in the hall and said that Siesta had just personally renounced her right to become the head of the family. Hearing this, the girl became even more indignant. She shouted loudly at her father and said that he was wrong because she had not refused at all. But at that moment, Hans entered the conversation. He started yelling at the girl and asked how she didn't refuse, since she had just done exactly that in front of everyone. The girl already wanted to say something. However, Hans continued to point his finger at her and said that it was useless to avoid answering. Everyone present in the hall were witnesses. Therefore, she could no longer get out of this. People began to whisper and realize that she had indeed refused. She had rejected the paternal care of Mr. Alias, and now she could not become the head. Siesta, hearing this, was very surprised. She could not believe that everything had happened this way and already wanted to say something, but she did not have time because Nicholas appeared in front of her. He asked the girl for forgiveness and took this bracelet out of the ground. After that, he shielded the girl with his back so that no one would harm her. Siesta, meanwhile, realized that absolutely no one understood what was really going on, and she couldn't do anything about it. They thought as her father told them. At this point, Vivienne decided to take the initiative. She clapped her hands to attract the attention of all the guests and addressed them, telling them to listen to her carefully. The girl came closer to eat and asked if the girl was going to become the head of the family. Siesta immediately said that of course she wanted it. She only refused that meaningless bracelet. Vivian, hearing this, was surprised and immediately asked her why the girl did not accept this bracelet. Did she really not like it? But the girl lowered her head down, explained that she felt an ominous force from him. She did not intend to wear such a thing, and that is why she threw it out of her hands. At that moment, her father suddenly approached her. He put his hand on his daughter's shoulder and asked her if she was really unwell. He pretended as if it really bothered him. The girl felt very uncomfortable with the fact that he was squeezing her shoulder, so she removed his hand and demonstratively made a displeased expression on her face. The man meanwhile turned to Mrs. Vivian and asked her for forgiveness. He said that the damn child had a habit of lying, and that was why she decided to attract attention to herself in this way. Siesta immediately started yelling at him and told him not to talk nonsense. Then, in the hall, people started talking to each other again. They didn't know whose position to take and who to believe. For this reason, Link could not just stand aside any longer. He decided to intervene in this conversation. He came closer to them and said that the man looked at least strange, hiding behind a lie. He came closer to Mrs. Vivian and told the man that calling her cursed did not harm her. He asked what it mattered that she had a different hair color from the rest of the family. He really didn't understand what was such a big problem for him. He wondered if discrimination was the right solution in this situation, when Link got down on one knee in front of Ms. Vivian and addressed her directly. The guy told her that he was one of those who gave the Psy letter of recommendation, and for this reason, he was also going to take responsibility if this decision turned out to be wrong. As soon as Siesta heard these words, she was very surprised. She did not expect that Link would somehow want to stand up for her, and because of this, she felt very pleased. Vivian, meanwhile, smiling happily, said that apparently he did not hesitate in his decision and had already clearly made it. Then she looked at Ado, who was standing next to Hans in the meantime, and asked what about him, because she knew that he had also given a letter of recommendation. He looked at his friend and was about to say something, but his partner smiled happily and said that now, everything would be as they had agreed. But passing by him, he said that he was very sorry for this reason. He approached Mrs. Vivian and, getting down on one knee, said that he also thought that she was worthy of becoming the head of the family. Ido explained that she would definitely live up to Mrs. Vivian's expectations, so they didn't have to worry. As soon as the woman heard this, she immediately smiled happily. She was pleased to hear these words. Then she said in a quiet voice that she couldn't help but believe her if she was eaten and trusted by two heads of families, so she was definitely telling the truth. And as soon as the woman saw her for the first time, she immediately felt it. The woman came closer to him and said that one day they would become very close, and that is exactly what she felt. The girl's father already wanted to intervene in this conversation. However, she interrupted him and said that she was grateful to Alias for his previous loyalty. However, from that moment on, he could definitely rest, because he had a worthy replacement. The man was, of course, outraged by this. He asked Mrs. Vivian not to jump to conclusions, and also asked if the woman really was going to put him aside. Siesta was very surprised when she heard this. However, he suddenly came closer to her and grabbed the girl by the shoulder. He squeezed her so hard that she felt pain. To her happiness, Nicholas decided to stand up for her. He grabbed her father by the hand and told him to remove his hand, otherwise it would only get worse. Alias shouted loudly at the man and told him to shut up and not to tell him that, because it was his daughter. However, Nicholas grabbed his hand incredibly hard and held it back so that he would not touch the Siesta anymore. He looked at him with an incredibly angry look and asked if the man had not heard his words. Then Alias realized that things were bad, so he finally removed his hand from the girl and did not touch her anymore. Vivian did not like this wary atmosphere. She turned to the girl and said that there was no need to wear bracelets if she did not want. For this reason, Siesta could feel safe. After this, the woman addressed the crowd and said that if anyone objected to Siesta becoming the head of the family, they could come forward and voice their dissatisfaction. Irmel, as soon as she heard that she was now the head of the family, was sincerely happy for her sister. Her eyes simply shone with happiness. As soon as Vivian did not hear any objections, she smiled and said that if she came over, they would officially finish this ceremony as it should be. She took her staff, and then the girl knelt down. She held this ceremony and said that it was time to exalt the cease of the Corner family. She had to serve their kingdom with faith and truth. Siesta made a curtsy, knelt down again, and thanked her. She said that she would respectfully carry out any orders and would never let the people of their country down. Vivian was actually happy with this choice, so she smiled. Meanwhile, people started to applaud and congratulate the girl, and the father of the Siesta just left the hall very unhappy. Immediately after the ceremony ended, Ido and Link approached the girl, and they began to congratulate her. Well, Siesta smiled and said that it was all thanks to Linko's support. The boy laughed a little and said that it was more important that Mrs. Vivian was on her side, because if it weren't so, he wouldn't have helped either. Ado agreed with his partner and said that they gave her letters of recommendation, but the decision was still up to the girl, and if she had refused, nothing would have happened. He also said that since the woman accepted him, her environment will now change significantly, and the people around her will become different. But perhaps they will be friendlier than before. After this, Ido approached Hans and said that now he would have to try as her assistant. After all, if he lets the girl down, then the man himself would be punished. Hans was very upset at that moment. He could not believe that he really now had to be her assistant. He still wanted to say something to his friend, but he got ahead of him. He said that the guy had definitely lost, but it was not the end yet, and advised him not to give up but to continue to fight and believe in the best. Hans, hearing this, was immediately inspired. He really understood that this was not the end yet, so he was not going to stay. Ultimately, the lady became the head of the family after the inheritance ceremony, and she no longer had to be ashamed of her distinctive hair color. She became herself. Since then, Siesta could communicate with people without restrictions. But Jessica noticed that lately she still looked somehow sad and did not know what it was connected with. Irma quite often watched her little sister when she was all at work. And then one day, when she was doing it again, her brother suddenly came up to her from behind. The girl jumped up in surprise. Hans smiled and told her not to be so tense. In fact, he wanted to talk to her about something, that's all. Smiling, he said that now between the Siesta and him and his father, there was a rather high wall, but he knew that Irma got along quite well with her little sister. The girl smiled happily and asked if he really thought so. However, the guy replied that he still doubted that Siesta trusted her, even despite the fact that they had had a rather close relationship lately. Therefore, Hans decided to offer her a small cooperation. Irma, hearing about this, immediately lit up with joy. She thought that her brother seemed to be reading minds. She smiled happily and asked why they shouldn't celebrate with the whole family that Siesta had become the head. Then, she could directly tell her about his emotions. But the man refused this offer. He said that the Siesta would be upset by talk about him. He didn't want to take away the holiday, so he thought that it would be best for them to just be together and establish contacts with each other. Behind his back, the man held one small jar of Irma. Hearing that he did not want her to talk about him, she was a little upset because she did not know what else she needed to do then. The man then showed her the jar and said that, like Siesta, he was not yet ready for face-to-face conversations, and therefore he wanted her to drink the tea. He explained that the girl really loved this black tea, and the work of the head of the family was very exhausting. So he believed that she would be happy if Irma brewed this liquid and served it to her sister. The girl immediately became happy. She said that she would go and prepare everything as soon as possible so that her sister could rest sooner. Hans said goodbye to her and was very pleased with his work. After all, everything was finally starting to work out for him. Of course, this was another insidious plan of the man. However, he did not yet know what would come of it, but as always, he hoped that everything would be as he had planned. Meanwhile, Siesta was sitting in her office. She turned to Jessica and asked if Summer could go and get the dress she had ordered in advance. The maid immediately said that she would do everything and would not delay, after which she left the room, leaving the mistress alone. Siesta started working on the papers again. She thought that doing the job of the head of the family was quite tiring, and over the last hour she had gone through so many different contracts that her head was already spinning. However, she still had to make a few signatures when suddenly someone knocked on her door. Siesta immediately put the papers aside and allowed the person to enter. When she looked at the front door, she saw her sister Irma, who came in, smiled happily and asked if she would like to take a little break between her work. She brought the girl a whole cart with various sweets and freshly brewed tea. As soon as Siesta smelled this smell, she immediately agreed to this tea party. Her sister, smiling happily, said that she had brewed the tea that the girl loved very much. She also asked if Siesta would like to take a little break, because she knew how hard the girl had been working lately. In the end, no one objected. Irma poured a cup of tea for the girl and Siesta, thanking her, immediately tried it because she definitely wanted tea. Then the sister decided to start a casual conversation and congratulated her on finally becoming the head of the family. After that, she said that in fact, someone gave her this special tea, but she didn't have time to finish this sentence because Siesta suddenly looked away and dropped the cup. After that, the girl quickly grabbed her head. She felt just awful and she could not stay conscious for long, so she soon fell onto the sofa, losing it. Armel immediately panicked when she saw this. She ran up to her sister, burst into tears, and screamed loudly for someone to help. She tried to shake her sister and make her wake up. Soon, she still managed to make the girl open her eyes. At that moment, Hans entered the room since he was the first to hear all these screams. The man came closer and smiled happily. Armel, meanwhile, turned to her brother and said that he had come just in time with his sister. There was something strange and she did not know how to help her. But the man just laughed. He agreed that the boobs were bad because the anesthetic had worked, and he was really happy about it. There were two more men next to him. One of them came up to Siesta and kicked her right on the head. Irmel immediately tried to stop him. She asked what he was doing and asked him to stop because it would hurt her. But Hans took the girl by the hand and looked away. He said in a rough voice that if Armel continued to snap at him, he would quickly send her back to the shelter. The man also said that it would be best for her to just smile. If she smiles, she will be as dear to him as before, but if there are no consequences, she already knows. Irmel realized that she was in danger. Soon the men finally finished. They took her by the arms and legs and began to carry her to the cart, as Hans ordered to do so. Irmel at that moment understood that if her brother did not stop, something terrible would happen. However, she did not know how to stop him. The girl was completely alone and considered herself helpless in this situation. She thought that she could call this place home, unlike the shelter where she was, but in the end it turned out to be completely wrong. This place turned out to be even worse than she thought, because she began to get attached to these people and it was harder to let them go. At that moment, the girl suddenly turned her attention to the floor. She saw a small necklace that Irmel had given her as a sign of their rapprochement. She could not believe that Siesta had actually worn it and used it. The girl also thought that if she had been there, the girl would definitely not have suffered. However, now only she could save her sister, because only Irmal knew what had happened to her, and she felt guilty before the girl. She thought that if she just ran away, she wouldn't be able to change anything, but she definitely didn't want something terrible to happen to her sister, so the girl was very serious. Some time passed since then. Irmal finally began to regain consciousness. She was in the same cave as in all her previous lives. The girl felt chains on her hands. After that, she paid attention and saw this bracelet. Looking around with Siesta, she realized that she was there again. She also knew that Hans simply took and brazenly deceived Irmal and used her sister. She definitely didn't know anything, because before Siesta finally lost consciousness, she saw her sincere pity and worry. Siesta also really hoped that the girl would not feel too guilty, because in this situation only Hans and his ego were to blame. Siesta believed that as soon as her disappearance was discovered, Jessica, with her good intuition, would immediately guess everything and get to work. So she thought that she would not have to wait long and everything would work out. However, suddenly Siesta heard loud steps at the beginning of the cave. She immediately became wary, thinking that Hans had come to check how she was here. The girl was already ready to kill him with her own hands. However, to her great surprise, she saw that it was not her brother. It was Irmal, who looked excited in her hands. She was holding a lantern and was running straight to the Siesta. The girl, seeing Irmal in this place, immediately asked what she was doing there. However, Irmal explained that the mercenary brothers had boarded a carriage and she had slipped inside through a crack and arrived with them. The girl sat down next to her and took the stones in her hands in order to remove these terrible shackles from her sister's hands. She said that there was a guard at the exit. However, there was a hole through which they would probably be able to pass. The girl at least really counted on it. Siesta screamed loudly and said that if they were noticed, they would definitely not let them go. So she advised her little sister to leave. For now, everything was fine with her because she did not want to be harmed. But the girl said that she would never leave. It all happened because of her, because she believed her brother's words, so they had to be saved together. She began to cut these chains while Siesta watched her in surprise. She thought that it was the first time she had seen her sister with such a concentrated expression on her face, and she realized that Irmal had come with determination. She knew what she wanted, and without that she definitely would not have left. Then Siesta turned to her and asked if the girl really wanted to break the bracelets with this stone. The girl said that she would at least like to try, because the stone was quite sharp and it could work. Then, Irmal began to very quickly try to break these shackles of Alesta. Immediately said that she should hit as hard as she could and not think about her hands. The main thing for them was to get out. Irmal listened to her sister and began to hit even harder. However, at the moment when she swung for another blow, she heard her brother's voice behind her. Guns came closer to her and asked what she was doing. After that, he said that she was a bad girl since she violated his order. He grabbed her by the hand and began to pull her away from her sister, after which he turned to Siesta and said that not only had she become impudent herself, but that she had also ultimately turned Irmal into the same. He turned to his foster sister and said that it would have been better for her to remain his little doll. Then what was about to happen would not have happened. The girl at that moment thought that she would never be able to compare with her brother. She could have given up and asked him for forgiveness and betrayed the Siesta, but saved herself. She also thought that she would never become as great as her sister. So she would really like to have at least something in her life. Irmal thought that she was definitely a completely useless person in that world, and then, unable to hold back her tears, she burst into tears. However, at that moment, Siesta, seeing this, screamed loudly. She said that she hated tears. She remembered this feeling of her own helplessness and weakness. She addressed her sister directly and said that if she wanted to sit in a cage for eternity, then she could do as she wished. However, Siesta said in a very confident voice that she did not consider Irmal a doll at all. She called her name and said that she was her younger sister and first and foremost a person. As soon as the girl heard this, a hope ran through her soul. She thought that perhaps not all was lost as she thought, but Hans continued to hold her even tighter. He turned to the girl and told her not to believe her sister's words. After all, if she got involved with her, then nothing good could come out of it. Irmal then, in a quiet voice trembling with fear, told her brother that he was right after all. The man was very happy to hear this. He realized that he had really managed to do as he had planned. He said that now he definitely recognizes his good girl. Meanwhile, Irmal reached for his hand because he loosened his grip. She grabbed his palm and bit incredibly hard. He stumbled and could not stay on his feet and therefore began to fall backwards. Meanwhile, Remy sat down and took a sharp stone. She ran to her sister and tried to free her again. At that moment, she swung at those shackles and screamed loudly, telling her brother that she was not a little doll that could be controlled. Irmal stated that she was a human and a sister of Siesta, and at that moment she was able to destroy that terrible golden bracelet that was holding the girl's powers back. Siesta immediately felt her abilities inside. She activated butterflies that spread throughout the cave. Some butterflies began to approach her chains in order to free their mistress. Hans, meanwhile, watching all this, thought about what happened not at all as he expected. He understood that he needed to run away before something even worse happened. But at that moment, as he turned around, he ran into a man who was standing right in front of him. This man turned out to be Nicholas. The man looked at Hans with complete hatred and was ready to kill him on the spot. But of course, he did not do this. Hans yelled at him and told him to get out of his way, but Nicholas said that the guy had been arrested for attempted murder. From the Siesta, he was very surprised and immediately asked on what basis he said these words. but Nicholas asked if it was not he who dropped that bronze statue on the street in order to kill his sister and get the throne. He also said that from that day until he gave orders to his subordinates to guard the surrounding area, and he also learned about the incident from them. However, he allowed him to leave in order to have full grounds to arrest him. After that, he pointed to the two men who were guarding the cave from the outside. Nicholas said that the men he hired around the perimeter were also captured and could not escape, so Hans was at a loss either way. The man said that he would soon be given the punishment he deserved. Therefore, he definitely won't be able to escape responsibility for his actions. After that, he put the guy's hands behind his back and Hans continued to push away. He said that everything was not as it seemed, it was all just a misunderstanding and asked to be given a chance to explain. But of course, no one did this. Nicholas went to this golden bracelet that Siesta broke and took it as evidence. Hans meanwhile looked at the Siesta and said that they were a family after all, so he asked the girl to help him. He didn't want any punishment, but the girl replied that it was not a very good idea. So he could definitely not count on her help. Meanwhile, she saw that Siesta was okay, and she already wanted to hug her. But the girl held back and Siesta thanked her and said that this time she managed to save her. However, Irmel said that in fact it was all her fault, but the way Siesta answered him was really very courageous and she admires her sister for such willpower. Siesta smiled and said that she was her younger sister, so it was natural that she wanted to protect her. At that moment, she began to wipe the dirt from under her cheek, and Irmel felt incredible affection and warmth for the girl. At the same time, Jessica ran into the cave. She turned to the lady and asked for forgiveness for being late. She said that Mr. Nicholas offered to cooperate in order to shed light on Mr. Hans's crime, and she agreed to it. Seeing her maid, she smiled. She said that she understood everything and also added that she was fine, so she asked Jessica to take care of Irmel. The sign of Irmel immediately said that she was also fine and did not need any special protection. Meanwhile, Siesta threw a blanket over her shoulders and said that she was all dirty, so she asked her to go with the maid and obey her. The girl simply had no choice, so together with Jessica, they were the first to start leaving the cave. Siesta stood in place, also covered with a blanket and smiling. She was happy that everything ended well. Nicholas, meanwhile, came closer to her and said that they had overcome Hans the guard, so he definitely wouldn't be able to cause her any more harm. Siesta thanked him with all her heart and said that since the day he saved her, he has been constantly worried about her and she was very pleased about it. However, she said that this is exactly what she should expect from the chief of the guard. He can definitely be relied upon, and she was happy that he was there at the right moment. The man was embarrassed when he heard all this. He decided to change the subject of the conversation and saw that her wrist had turned very red, but the girl said that it was all unimportant. Nicholas, meanwhile, took her hand and said that in fact he wanted to intervene and help her right away. However, he could not do it. He explained that the previously confiscated bronze statue could not be evidence that someone had deliberately thrown it in order to kill her. So this method was simply the only way to put Hans away. Meanwhile, he bandaged her wrist so that the girl would feel at least a little easier. Nicholas also said that this time, they had complete proof that those men received money for adding anesthetic to her tea. He also smiled and added that her kidnapping and attempted murder could be called an indisputable fact. So Hans would definitely never be able to harm her again. She could now be calm. Siesta smiled and said that she had thought about it before. But in the end, Nicholas really was a reflection of the entire army and she was now confident in them. The man, hearing about this, immediately became wary. He suddenly took her hand and asked if she didn't remember one very important moment. The girl didn't answer this. Then Nicholas realized that he had started this conversation in vain and asked her to forget about it and also suggested that they go back already. Siesta thought that before they had many opportunities to meet and talk, but it didn't work out. Smiling, he said that this time he would take responsibility to report what happened to Mrs. Vivian. Hans would not harm her anymore, so she could calm down and fully devote herself to the work of the head of the family. She thanked him. He then left first and she stood there for a while, and after that she went after him. She thought about the fact that her brother was now far away. But despite this, before he would simply hide behind his father's prestige and do what he wanted. However, now everything was a little different, and Siesta thought about the fact that perhaps someone had provoked him. After all, he himself certainly could not have thought of such a thing. Then she suddenly looked again at the crime scene and saw that the bracelet was not there. She immediately became interested in who took it and most importantly, why. Eventually, the news that Hans had attempted to murder his younger sister spread throughout the city's newspapers and everyone knew about it. The newspapers suggested that his motives for his actions were jealousy over the loss of his family's head. However, no one knew for sure. These were just guesses. Soon they decided to take Hans in a cage towards the court, and of course the people who were around immediately noticed him and started talking about the offender passing by. They wanted to look into the eyes of this shameless man who decided to kill his sister. Hans, meanwhile, was very angry. He understood that everything was going against him and did not know how to get out of this situation. I sighed heavily when Hans said that they all treated him so meanly. But he could have become the head of his family and eventually even ruled them. But now he has become a laughingstock. People actually gathered when he passed by. They looked at him with their finger and laughed behind his back. They thought Hans was just awful. Soon the guy couldn't take it anymore. He got tired of them looking at him and laughing. He turned to them and said that he actually had outstanding Henton blood, so he didn't understand what right they had to behave like that. He also said that he was actually a chosen person, unlike all those people who had gathered to watch and laugh at him. Meanwhile, Siesta was also in the square through which the man was being transported. She thought that up until that moment, she had been held captive and in a cage by this very man. She was truly tortured to death and then finally freed from that cage, and finally the girl achieved the justice she had dreamed of her whole life. And not only one. Hans, meanwhile, continued to shout at people. He said that someday they would definitely understand that they had made a big mistake. However, this will not happen now. So he said that under no circumstances would he allow any of the guys who bullied him to come out from under the basement. They would be locked up there for the rest of their lives and would answer for all their behavior. At the same time, Hans's father was also on the square. He watched everything that was happening and was sincerely amazed. He did not think that his son could ruin his reputation like this. From that moment, several hours passed and Siesta returned to the palace, where Jessica came to see her. She said that she had received a letter from Lady Vivian. As soon as the lady heard this, she was immediately very surprised that she had received a letter from Lady Vivian, but she quickly opened it and began to read, because she was interested. In this letter, Lady Vivian said to Eat that she received a report from Nicholas about the incident that happened quite recently. The woman said that she was very worried and she was incredibly sorry that the girl had to go through such a terrible, everyday life with her brother. She did not know that she had been bullied for days, and even more so that he could be capable of something like that. Vivian also wrote that at her hearing, Hans screamed and yelled. However, she was interested in the fact that for several days, he was put on display as a criminal, and he made a huge scandal, and even there, the woman wrote that he probably became quite obedient after prison because he understood that things could get even worse. Vivian also suggested that it might be possible to eat and not want to see his face again. However, she would arrange it so that the girl could visit him if she wanted. The woman also wrote that if she had any problems, she could of course contact her at any time. Vivian was sure that she could be useful to her, and that was the end of the letter. Siesta. As soon as she read it, was a little surprised. She thought that despite the fact that it was a shame for the whole family to have such a relative, Vivian was very attentive and worried about her. Then the lady suddenly stood up. Jessica was very surprised to see that she was just going to read a book on the sofa. She immediately asked where this girl had decided to go. Siesta replied that she just wanted to go out a short distance away, and after that, activating her abilities, she moved to another place. In fact, she moved to the prison to her brother in order to see him. Hans, meanwhile, sat with his head down. But as soon as he saw something bright lit up next to him, he immediately paid attention to it. The man, seeing his sister, said that she had come after all. He was even glad as soon as he saw Siesta, because he thought that she could help him. The man stood up and said that he felt very lonely because no one had ever come to him during the entire time he had been in prison. After which he asked how everyone was doing there because he was interested in whether anyone was worried about him. But the girl said that she didn't know anything because her father had disappeared. But everything else was fine, so he didn't have to worry. After that, Hans asked if Ido had said anything about this, but the girl said that there was nothing special, so they hardly even communicated. The guy suddenly grabbed the bars with his hands. He said that Siesta was the only girl he had left. He thought that she would be on his side and help him. That's why he even reached out to his sister. He asked Siesta to cooperate for the sake of his beloved brother and help him in the end. But of course, the girl was not going to do anything like that. In fact, up until this moment, Siesta had a connection with her blood brother, and she took his hand many times, but she did not know that as a result, her role would simply be death in her brother's place. She blindly trusted her family, and Hans in particular. So this time when she had the advantage, the girl leaned down to him lower and said that she also loved her family. But now it was too late. The man, hearing about this, was very surprised and asked what she meant. Well, Siesta told her brother that he was probably lonely, so she planned to find her father and eventually sit him next to him. The girl explained that this way he would definitely not be bored anymore. And until then, she also asked that Hans be a good boy and not make scandals. This would only be better for him. Hans, hearing this, immediately screamed. He asked her not to leave him, but the girl turned around and began to leave, telling her brother not to say unfounded things because he was definitely not worth saving. She thought that it was well deserved that she ended up in that place. The man then asked how it was possible that he was not worth saving. Did that mean that he would never be able to get out of that place and would remain there forever? At that moment, he had a lot of thoughts in his head. He screamed loudly, fell to the ground, and banged his head on the floor. The man was really in despair and did not know what awaited him next. Siesta didn't even pay attention to it. She just decided to leave. She thought that he might only prolong this useless struggle for a while, but in the end, he would still be there. In fact, at that moment, Nicholas was nearby and watched what was happening. He was concerned that the girl had a different expression in her eyes than before, and he assumed that this was the reason she made such a decision. Of course, he could understand why these things happened. He also knew what actions could be forgiven just because you are family and whatnot. However, it was hard for him to believe that the girls could so easily just leave, leaving their own brother there. For this reason, Nicholas decided to talk to her a little. He caught up with Lady Siesta already on the street. The girl, hearing his voice, was immediately surprised and stopped to talk to him. The man smiled and asked if she could stay for a minute because he really wanted to discuss something important with her. The girl did not object. Then they moved a little further away from the prison so that the situation would not be so tense. And Nicholas said that, first of all, he would like to apologize to the girl in advance. The man explained that some time ago he heard Siesta talking to her brother in prison, and he accidentally overheard her conversation. The girl immediately became wary and asked if this was really true, and also asked for forgiveness for the fact that he had to hear something unpleasant. But Nicholas replied that he thought the reason she was different from her former self was because of what happened to her brother. However, now he can't understand why she said such terrible things last day and today right to her brother's face. He turned to Lady Siesta and in a very concerned voice asked what had happened to the girl, because he knew that she would not usually behave like that. But the girl, adjusting her hair, asked what he meant, and how this whole situation was connected with him. She did not understand. He sighed heavily and said that he could easily imagine that she was oppressed because of her abilities that manifested themselves in the girl and not in the others. However, Nicholas said that they were one family after all, so there was no way they couldn't understand each other, and he assumed that there must have been some other reason why Lord Alias also disappeared after his brother was arrested. The girl then smiled and said that it was very optimistic. But then she raised her voice and said that she had never had the hair color that the Hunton family should have. That was what initially distinguished her the most. Siesta said that in other words, from the moment she was born with this hair color, her father did not consider her to be his daughter. She explained that in that house she was always judged and not accepted as a member of the family, and now she is surprised by the fact that Nicholas says that they should understand each other and help each other because they were a family. The girl said that for her this was truly nonsense. She didn't understand how he could say something like that. I don't even know the whole situation that was happening in their family. Because of this, Nicholas felt a little uncomfortable. He immediately asked the girl for forgiveness and said that he didn't know that she had to go through something like this. And if he had known, he certainly would never have said those words. By that time, Siesta had calmed down a little. She smiled and said that it didn't matter. She didn't even expect that he would be able to understand it after that, asking for forgiveness. She turned around and started to leave. The man felt very sad about this. He realized that he had made a big mistake and thought about why he had done this at all, because in this way, he had simply ruined their already strained relationship. At the same time, Hans continued to sit in prison and he suddenly saw that another visitor had come to him. As soon as the guy raised his head and saw a familiar face, he immediately became happy. At first, of course, he thought that it was Siesta who had returned. However, he saw that it was not she at all. Ido had come to him. The man smiled happily and said that it was a pity that he was not the person the guy expected to see. However, he came to talk. Hans was very angry when he saw your old friend. After all, he thought that it was he who simply took him and set him up. But Ido said that he was pleased to see that the guy was doing well and that he was safe and sound, because after that road past people he was afraid that something bad could happen. Of course, Hans, hearing that he thought everything was fine, got very angry and started yelling at him and asked who he thought was responsible for all this. As soon as Ido heard this, he made a surprised expression on his face and asked if the guy really wanted to say that he was to blame for Hans ending up in prison. The man said in a more cold-blooded voice that he had lost as a result of madly submitting to his frantic desire. And now, he was a great sinner who tried to harm a woman who was even acknowledged by Lady Vivian herself. Hans himself was to blame for all his problems, and he could not believe that the guy was actually trying to blame someone else. Ido also said with a smile on his face that now Siesta was one of the 3 great noble families, and if it were him who was in Hans's place, he might not be able to bear it and would lose all hope of life. As soon as the guy heard Ido, he was immediately confused. He thought that this was really so. Even if he somehow managed to get out of prison, he would no longer be able to live the way he had before. Now everyone hated and despised him. His friend continued to mock him. He said that if Hans no longer wanted to live longer, then he should have used the gun that he had just wanted to give him in case he wanted to shorten his life. After his friend left the gun with Hans, he immediately left. The man was now even more desperate. He did not know what to do. Hans sat on the ground, and next to him lay a weapon. He thought that if he had shown the ability, then everything would have been fine. If he had done something differently, then he would not have ended up in prison. The man became so angry that he even hit the bars with his hand. He thought that if he had at least the ability of light, then everything would really be different, and he could avoid this terrible fate. At that moment, he was so desperate that he was about to take the gun. However, he suddenly saw some kind of glowing ball above his head. He didn't understand what it was and, of course, immediately became interested in it. The man decided to touch this strange substance. He thought that something like this definitely shouldn't be here, and accordingly, he thought that perhaps it would help him somehow survive. Then he touched this small glowing ball and thought that perhaps it would somehow react to him. And as soon as he did this, the ball suddenly split into 2 parts. Hans thought that this was very different from the abilities of Ercole, or Hakarine. It was almost the same as the power of light. And as soon as Hans found out about this, he immediately laughed loudly. He thought that Siesta's power was not real. Now the man clearly knew this. He thought about the fact that the one who is worthy of being the head of the family is he. After all, he now possesses the real power of light that his family should have possessed. The man thought that he was now a real ruler. However, at that moment, to his greatest surprise, he felt a strong pain in his chest, after which he heard the sound of a shot. A lot of blood started pouring out of Hans. He fell to the ground, holding his chest to stop the bleeding. But it was all useless. He was on the verge of death. After that, the man suddenly heard someone's voice. On the other side of the bars, this voice said that it was very difficult to show the ability now and not all the time that he had after that. This man said that they did not need two heads of the family, one was enough for them. This unknown person said that Siesta is the head of Hanton, and this is the only way out that should have been there is no other option. Hans asked that the man who was aiming at him again stop. However, this did not happen, and soon the man shot him again, but this time in the head, so that the man would die completely. In fact, this mysterious killer turned out to be Lady Vivian. After she fired another shot, the girl said that she wished that he had not forced her to go to such additional troubles, but she had no choice. Meanwhile, Siesta had already returned to the estate. She was with her sister, heading to the living room, when suddenly Jessica began to bully her. She looked very agitated. The girl looked at her maid in surprise and immediately asked what happened. Then Jessica ran closer to her and shouted loudly that news had arrived that Hans had committed suicide. And the girls, as soon as they heard this, were shocked. Armel couldn't even bear this news. She fell to the ground and said that she couldn't believe it. She burst into tears. Her whole body was shaking. The girl said that he certainly had many bad qualities, but she believed that he also had a good side and now she had lost her brother. Siesta, meanwhile, was also a little shocked by this news. She thought that the brother who used her so much as a substitute was now definitely dead. It was difficult for the girl to accept the fact that he really committed suicide, tormented by a sense of guilt. And she also thought that if this was really so, then it changed everything. But in order to finally make sure, Siesta decided to return to prison again. She saw a prisoner who was next to his brother's cell. As soon as Siesta appeared, she immediately turned to this prisoner. She said that Hans should have been imprisoned in that cell in the back container and asked if the man knew anything about what happened to him and how it happened. As soon as the prisoner heard Hans's name, he immediately asked if she really meant the guy who committed suicide with a gun in his cell. His eyes lit up as soon as he realized that he would have something to talk about. Siesta asked again, "Did he really shoot himself with a gun?" She didn't understand where he got it from in the cell back then. He explained that since he was a little ahead, he heard several shots from behind, after which the knights simply carried out the body. He also said that unlike them, only people with a certain status go back. So he assumed that Hans probably made some kind of deal and forced someone to give him a weapon so that he could commit the suicide. Siesta, having heard this whole fascinating story, said that she understood. After that, she thought that of course when she visited this man, there were no other criminals there, and therefore she thought that it all looked as if no one saw the moment when her brother committed suicide. The girl, of course, considered this whole situation very strange. After all, no one could clearly confirm that it was he who shot himself. She decided to talk to one of the knights who was guarding this entire prison. After she finished the conversation, she went to the exit and thought about this entire situation. Siesta wondered if there should be a funeral for the body without the family's permission. After all, they said that the condition of the body was simply unbearable. It was really badly damaged. And besides, the girl thought that if this was done secretly and with the participation of only a limited class of people, then they would not be able to know the burial place. And besides, she was incredibly interested to know how her brother managed to get the weapon. Unfortunately, it remained a mystery, but she definitely wanted to solve it. Siesta thought that he just took it and disappeared in an instant. She felt as if someone had taken and snatched her prey. Because of this, the girl was very angry because she herself wanted to take revenge on him. She stood in front of the man's camera for a while, and then suddenly she heard footsteps approaching her. The girl immediately turned her head to the side to see who it was. And then she saw that Vivian began to approach the camera, and she was accompanied by Nicholas. The girl was all in black, and in her hands she had several white roses. Vivian, seeing C's, immediately turned to her. She said that it also happened suddenly for her, so she could not understand her feelings. But she came to present flowers to Hans, because she believed that no matter how bad a person he was, he still deserved respect and memory of him.